Morning. I'm Hagemejer. I'm currently the president of the management board of CASE, and I will try. It's my pleasure to open this conference seminar. I will be quick because we're already a bit late and we are trying to catch up. So welcome everyone, those online and those in the Staszica Palace. The weather is not great today, and I hope it's going to get better by the end of the day, so you can maybe enjoy a little bit of Warsaw. But what this conference is conclusion of a joint project by CASE, Center for Social and Economic Research, and our partner institutions from Armenia, Georgia, and Moldova, MODEX in Yerevan, Economic Policy Research Center in Tbilisi, and expert group in Chisinau. The funding for the project came from the Open Society Foundation, which we of course acknowledge and we are very grateful for. And today we have a great lineup of speakers. We'll have papers on a wide range of topics related or directly on stability and resilience, which is also very much the topic of the project, which Marek Dabrowski will shed some light on just following my short introduction. And we have papers on remittances, external shocks, energy security, illicit financial flows, sanctions and entrepreneurship, and the war economy, labor market shift. So all the important, I would say, areas that are now affected by the instability of the region of Eastern Europe. We also have a keynote speech by Anders Oslund, who is, among other functions, CASE's Advisory Council Chairman. So I'd like to thank, first of all, Marek, who is the leader of the project and also a CASE fellow and a fellow at Bruegel, as well as our experts and the partner institutions. And special thanks are owed to our communications team, Marta, and others who made this conference possible, really. And thank you again for being here. And I now turn the floor to Marek.
Thank you, Jan. My duty was coordinate from academic point of view this project. The title of the project was Increasing Economic Resilience of three countries, Armenia, Georgia, and Moldova. But we also expanded geographic coverage to the entire European part of the former Soviet Union. And this project this project was one of many projects related to this region, which CASE has been involved from the very beginning of its existence, meaning from the fall of 1991. Practically our first projects were on that time assisting economic transition in countries of the former Soviet Union. And also we were supported by the same donor, Open Society Foundation, but it was a slightly organized in different way. At that time, the European headquarters of OSI was in Budapest. It's not longer the case. This particular project was conducted between October 2023 and March 2025. It's a research phase. And since the end of the last year, until this month, we implement the dissemination phase, which this conference is practically last accent in this dissemination campaign related to this project. Project has been coordinated by CASE, as mentioned by Jan, and had 3 partners: MODEX in Yerevan, Economic Research, Policy Research Center TBDC, and expert group in Chisinau, and 2 first institutes are represented here in this conference, at least to my knowledge. What was the project purpose, agenda, and time horizon of our research? The main project purpose was to examine consequences of major shocks which affected the region, starting from the global financial crisis of 2008-9, then decline of commodity prices in 2014-16, which affected mostly commodity producing country, mostly oil producers, but not only. Then COVID-19 pandemic, and finally the Russian full-scale aggression against Ukraine since February 2022 for the economies of the entire region. Project thematically cover 4 economic policy areas: macroeconomic stability, financial stability, external economic relation. This included trade, investment, and migration. Then energy sector, but each of our reports also included political and geopolitical background related either to individual country or to the entire region. The detailed analysis in depth analysis covers 3 countries which are in the title of this project: Armenia, Georgia, and Moldova, and broader regional analysis also included Azerbaijan, Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. In terms of the time span, it covered the period since 2007, meaning last year of rapid growth before the global financial crisis, and ended 2023, 2024, depending on data availability. But special focus was put on the last 5 years, meaning the period of COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine. Now about project outputs. In the first phase of the project, we produced 3 country studies on Armenia, on Georgia, and on Moldova. Here the titles of these reports and the authors and website addresses in the case report series where they can be found and download. In the second phase, we prepared a regional report which covered 7 countries, which I already mentioned, and here there is titled authors. Basically, it was authored by the case team, which coordinated the entire project. And here's also a website address where can be download this. The final phase, we started in December 2024. There are a series of dissemination events. First, these were local presentation of country reports, Yerevan, TBDC, and Chisinau. Then there was the joint case Bruegel event organized in Brussels at the end of February, where we presented the first draft of regional report. Then we had two case webinars. One was at the end of March, where we presented all country studies to broad international audience, and similar webinar at the end of June, in which we presented regional report. And today conference, what is the role of today conference? First, we want to amend results which we accomplished during this project with presentation of external authors on similar topics or the same topics, update of project results in few cases, because as I mentioned, they basically cover data until end of 2003, in many instances 2024, but it could not cover 2025, which is approaching its end. And broadening regional analysis by including also Central Asian countries. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I would like to ask Dmytro Boyarchuk, who is chair of the session 1, and also all speakers which are scheduled for this session, to take seats behind this table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marek. My name is Dmytro Boyarchuk, and I will be managing, or kind of moderating, the first session, which is called Regional Analysis. And I want to invite to this table our brilliant 5 speakers for the first session. Karsten Staehr, Tihomira Kostova and Tsvetomir Nikolov, Nurlan Rahimli, Richard Pomfret, and Mikhail Krutikhin. So let's begin with a very interesting first presentation of Karsten Staehr, which the name is Growth Experiences and Prospects of the Eastern Partnership Countries. So please, the floor is yours. You have 12 minutes to give the main points.
Again. Okay, so this is basically just a presentation to advertise a paper that desperately needs citations. So everybody in this room, go home tonight and cite this paper. Okay, then I cannot. Okay, that's good. Okay, so outside the door here, or? The door, yes. Okay, so here we go. So it's a little bit of an advert. It's a broad overlook about what has happened in the post-communist countries after they were let free, and it's written by together with Mei Li. She is from China. We all have to write papers with people from China these days. When the Chinese come, it's very good to say, I have written papers with Chinese persons. So here we are. So. Yes, I know that, but yes. So it's a little bit like a party here. So basically, the questions we ask in this paper is: have these countries sort of managed to diminish the gap to the rich countries? Is it the poor ones who have managed the best to close the gap? And yeah, that's basically it. So it's basically very easy stuff, namely to download GDP per capita from whatever sources. There's a little bit of fiddling here with it. And then basically, yeah, I'll deal with 3 groups: the members from Central Eastern Europe that are now members of the EU, the Balkan countries, and the rest, basically the ex-Soviet countries. So this is the picture, and now we can go home. So this basically shows the EU 15 countries, relatively successful, almost 75% of the income level of the West European EU 15, as I call it. But we also see that some of the countries regions have been less successful. Here we have the ex-Soviet countries, and we have also the Balkan countries, which still sort of is only half of the income level of the EU 15. I have also included what's called Russia, and it's actually fascinating. For 15, 20 years, they haven't really caught up with the EU 15. Okay, for these countries we're dealing with today, yeah, it really started out low, poor. 10% of EU 15 income level. This is Azerbaijan, and this is high oil prices. You will actually see that, I will go back one slide, I'm not supposed to do it, but you can see the same bump for Russia. Here we have it for Azerbaijan, and we also have it to an extent here for Belarus. They get cheap oil from Russia. One striking and worrying feature is that Ukraine hasn't really managed to catch up for 30 years, or from 1995 until now, basically. So this is, of course, troubling. Moldova is not much better. Okay, then one could start sort of doing a little bit of numbers here. So we could calculate the average rate of catching up every year. How much faster did each of these countries grow than the EU 15? So how much of the gap did they close? And I have done this calculation for different time samples. You didn't bring your glasses? No. So I will take the lower part and blow it off. I hope that's okay. Yes, here we are. Can you read that? Yes. So this is basically what I call the relative growth over almost 30 years. How much faster did these countries grow than the EU 15? It looks actually very good for Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, but they started out being so desperately poor. For Belarus, middle, and for some of the countries here, especially Ukraine, Russia, convergence has actually been dreadfully slow. Okay, so this is written here, but I don't have time to discuss it. But some of these countries in the sample here, some have converged fast, some less fast. One question we could ask ourselves is it so that the poorest countries have grown the fastest? And that's the question I'll try to answer in two ways. With a figure you can't see. I teach for a living, so I know how important it is that figures cannot be seen. You get much more freedom when you make presentations. But here I have the GDP per capita in 1995, % of EU 15. And here I have this relative growth. How much faster have they grown than the EU 15? And if you take one look at it, you can say, oh, it looks like the poor countries have grown faster than the rich countries, Slovenia, Czechia. They're one starting the transition in a relatively good position. But then if you look here, you will see that there is enormous, if you are in the group of 10 to 20%, so really poor, there is enormous difference in the growth performance across the countries from Ukraine here to Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan up there. One can do estimations here. That is convergence, real convergence estimations. It's actually not really this specification we use, but something very close. So this is the linear version. So we have what is your income level at the beginning of the party, 1995, and how much did you grow over this, whatever period we consider. And this is an industry. This has been done a million times. And there are papers, survey papers, meta-analysis. And they have decided that beta should be around 2%, which is basically the poorest of these countries close 2% of the gap to the richest. This is a story about why we have enormous income differences in the world. That's because the poor countries don't grow much faster than the richer ones. If we do the exercise for these countries, then if we start by doing it for 30 countries, it looks something like this. So the beta coefficient, 2% is extremely low. It means basically no convergence. But if we look at all of the post-communist countries, and we look at whatever time sample, we get the same result. Beta is equal to 1%, which is extremely slow, way below basically no convergence. So this is what I have written here, but let us now try to look at 3 groups, and I just sort of make them up randomly. The CE11, the countries that have joined the EU, the Balkan countries, and the ex-Soviet countries, which excludes the Baltic states because I live in Estonia, so we don't want to be the ex-Soviet group. Let's see here, what's happening here? Okay, here we are. So now you should look at these. So we have looked at this, now we look at these columns. And the only difference is the time sample. And the story I want to show is here we have a beta of 5%. It's actually very, very big in international connections. So actually, the CE11, those countries that have joined the EU, they have actually grown very fast. The poorest and the richer one have grown less fast.
3 minutes left.
How much?
3 minutes.
Yeah, wonderful. So this is a positive story. If we now look at the Balkan countries, yeah, there is some problems with the data here. But when we look at the later samples, again, very low convergence speed. And if we look at the ex-Soviet countries, we have basically the same story in the former Soviet republics, convergence rate of 1 to 2%. Not fast. So this is a story here, but I don't have time to discuss it. You might say that these groups, CE11, Balkan, Soviet, I have decided it, so I've decided the results. There is now machinery, methods published in Econometrica. These are Phillips and Schulte, log-T, stat, test, where we make the choice of groups endogenous clustering. But actually, the endogenous clustering gives more or less the same result as when I pick it out based on what I can see on a map. So I'll skip that. Finally, there is something called conditional beta convergence. The story being countries might differ in various ways, which explains why some grow fast and some grow less fast. So we could run the estimation you saw before, this very simple cross-sectional regression. We can run that for conditioning, adding conditioning variable, adding control variables. And we do this, and I don't have time to show all. So we have a lot of variables we condition on, but the only result we get comes here, that if we condition on the World Bank's governance indicator, we actually, in the whole sample of 30 countries, get closer to this internationally established beta equal to 2%. So if we should have a story here, governance might be a differentiating factor. It's not a causal effect, a factor, I cannot claim that. And then we move on. Since my time is out, let me just do the conclusion here. All countries have lowered the gap. This also applies to these Eastern European partner countries, but it's very slow. especially for some of the countries. So the lesson sort of could be that actually joining the EU or being an EU country, the EU 11 have actually been doing very well, quite well. But it might also help to have good governance. And the last slide is just blatant advertisement for myself.
Thank you, Karsten. Very interesting presentation. Unfortunately, improving governance is not an easy task. The next presentation is about sanctions, evasion, and illicit flows. Tihomira and Tsvetomir, please, the floor is yours. 12 minutes, just to remind.
So, hello everybody. Before to delve into our findings, I would like to share a few words about the project. So, our project is trying to define the role of illicit financial flows in strategic corruption and state capture. In our project, we focus on 10 countries, including 4 from the Eastern Partnership region: Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia, and the 6 Western Balkan countries. Today, with my colleagues, we will share some results from unpublished working paper, an academic article, in which we focus on trade-related sanction evasion. So on this slide, you see that after 2022, all countries, including Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, have increased significantly their illicit financial flows related to trade. In fact, when it comes to outflows, money leaving the country, we see that Ukraine, Kosovo, and Armenia are leading in this effort, while when we speak about illicit financial inflows, money entering the country, again, the 4 countries from Eastern Partnership region have registered among the highest illicit financial inflows compared to other countries. So we decided to focus on the trade and to see how the trade relation changed before and after the war, especially in relation to sanctions. So we tracked the trade between EU and Russia for a specific sanctioned dual-use goods. And why EU? Because we know that EU used to be the main supplier of Western technologies to Russia before the war. For those of you who do not know, dual-use goods are a specific type of goods with both civilian and military purpose, and they're under sanctions since the war for Russia. So what we found is that before the war, there was a steady growth of the EU exports of dual-use goods to Russia, which decreased significantly in 2022 and stopped almost in 2022. However, in parallel, we found that in the meantime, EU increased its exports of dual-use items to other countries, third intermediary countries, including to our project countries and including to the 4 Black Sea countries. In fact, in 2024, we calculated that the imported volume of dual-use goods from the 6 Western Balkan countries, the 4 Black Sea countries, and the 5 Central Asian countries reached nearly 94% of the EU exports of these type of goods to Russia in 2021. So we formulated 3 quick questions, one of which is trying to answer whether the demand for sanction evasion through trade with dual-use goods impacted the EU exports to intermediary countries, and to what extent this impacted the subsequent re-export to Russia. The second question is trying to see whether there is some kind of connection between the estimated illicit financial flow related to trade, for which we applied the partnered country method, which is comparing export and import data. And it's very close to trade mirror statistics. And so we are trying to see whether there is a link between the trade-related illicit financial flows we estimated and the increased exports level of dual-use items to Russia. And the third question is we wanted to see whether the price increases in the exported dual-use goods to Russia provide enough evidence for a rent-seeking behavior among the intermediary traders. And the next slides Oops, sorry. Yeah. The next two slides, so we focus on the main results so far. So we did not find, it is worth mentioning that we did not find any link between the imported volume of dual-use goods of these countries and their exported levels to Russia before the war. However, after 2022, a strong link between the imported volume and exported volume we found for three countries, Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Turkey. And here is the time to mention that Kazakhstan, Turkey, and Kyrgyzstan was used as a benchmark case countries due to their major role as trade hubs. So Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Turkey, their higher monthly imports from the EU of these sensitive type of goods are closely mirroring their exports to Russia of the same type of goods. We also found that supply-demand dynamics for the three countries differ significantly. For example, in Armenia, it's more demand-driven, responding directly to Russian needs in a long run, while in Kazakhstan, it's more sporadic and, let's say, responding to ad hoc and specific orders placed by Russian companies. While in Turkey, for example, the exports to Russia are driven mainly by the exporter. In our case, this is Turkey, which means that the exports to Russia depends on the ability of Turkey to source these dual-use goods from EU and to storage them and then to export them. But not responding directly to Russian needs. It not depends on Russian needs and demands. As regards the remaining countries, we did not find statistically relevant connection between their imports and exports to Russia for this type of goods, but we found cases of sanction evasion, specifically trade with dual-use goods for all of them, for almost all of them, excuse me. Exceptions are Albania and Kosovo. By early 2024, it is visible that the exports of this type of goods to Russia decreased for all countries. As regarding the second question, we did not find a positive relation statistically relevant between the increased illicit financial flows, which we estimated, and the exports to Russia. And as regards the third question about the rent-seeking behavior, the data does not provide a consistent evidence for strong rent-seeking behavior. We found sporadic evidences, again, for three countries, Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Turkey. And this rent-seeking behavior is, and to a lesser extent, in Serbia and Kyrgyzstan. This rent-seeking behavior is mainly manifested through inflated prices. And these inflated prices are for specific goods and specific months. So I will stop here because these are the main results, which are still under development, and give the floor to my colleague who will present some other interesting findings.
Thank you very much, Tihomira. In the context what my colleague Tihomira already explained, we are constantly trying as a think tank to transform our academic work and our research and publications into policy recommendations and policy impacts. And we are constantly trying to use our findings to force political action. That's why using all these things and all these findings and all our work on illicit financial flows and dual-use goods, we focused in the last month our work on specific target groups as products like fertilizers and the products from the plastic industry. Why? Because we're trying to find the connection between the Russian natural gas and how this resource is used to subsidize different industries and especially sanctioned oligarchs. The first one is, of course, the fertilizers. The problem there is, despite personal sanctions on different owners of these Russian conglomerates like Uralchem, Dmitry Mazepin, for example, is the owner of the company, Fosagro, Iruchem, and Sibur. They continue to supply fertilizers and plastic to the EU, and their access to cheap domestic gas, which is a result from the war in Ukraine and that Russia lost their market in the EU. they are trying to find different destinations. Of course, this is really difficult because you don't have the infrastructure and you don't have enough capacity. So you're trying to diversify your natural gas to different industries that can use this natural gas to produce different products that you can re-export to EU. The problem here is, of course, that even after the EU understand that there is a problem and impose tariffs on the Russian and Belarusian fertilizers, imports remain high, with Russia still providing 25% of the imports and of the EU fertilizer supplies in 2025, which is something about 1 billion euro per year. And this is a huge problem, not only because there is direct import from Russia, but also there is a problem with re-exporting countries using, Russia is constantly using them as hubs. For example, Turkey, Morocco, Egypt, and etc.
3 minutes left.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, just a second. Yeah, and I'm gonna explain where is the connection between the fertilizers coming from Russia, and also how Russia is using Egypt and Morocco as hubs. There are different type of study cases because, for example, Morocco is importing a huge amount of ammonia. For example, in 2022, you can see that they exceeded $2 billion US dollars. That's the value of the imported products, which is a huge difference. And Egypt is a really interesting case also because they're imported directly urea and nitrogen fertilizers. And when we talk about plastics, it's really interesting because this new finding, because in the fertilizers we understand and we already know that there is a problem with the Russian natural gas, but in the plastic industry is something new because there is direct connection between the natural gas and the process in the industry, because you're using natural gas as a fuel in the high temperature process, but also using the natural gas as a chemical product in the process. And here the interesting case is how how the petrochemical giant Sibur is using Turkey and Central Asia countries to re-export and relabeling Russian plastics. With Turkey, it's really interesting because we have two different important things. First of all, Turkey is a huge importer of Russian natural gas. They're using between 40 and 50% of their natural gas is coming from Russia, and that's what that means is that if you're producing plastic in Turkey, it's really how to say, it's really common that the natural gas that you use for the process is coming from Russia. And the second problem is that Turkey is the main importer of the Russian plastic, so you can see a connection between importing and re-exporting to the EU these plastics and these plastic products. With Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan is also really interesting, especially Kazakhstan, because they increased their exports to the EU more than 70-fold since the beginning of the war. And there is a direct connection between the investments of Sibur in production facilities and utilities in Kazakhstan and what's happening after the beginning of the war. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tsvetomir, for investigating and analyzing that sensitive issue. I will invite Nurlan to tell us about remittances and the impact of shocks on remittances. You have 12 minutes, just to remind, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I am happy to be here. My name is Nurlan Rahimli. I am second-year PhD student at Kozymiński University, and today I will share some insights from my working research, which is trying to find the answer to the question, do external shocks reshape remittances? And I will provide some evidence from post-Soviet economies. And before I start, I should make some disclaimer that this research is independent and only for academic purpose, and it has received no funding. It has not published yet. The results are at very early stage, so I am very happy to take some critics and feedback from the more experienced audience. In general, the remittances play a significant role in the economies of post-Soviet countries, especially the countries such as Tajikistan, Kyrgyz Republic, and Moldova, Armenia. They are heavily dependent from the remittances. Remittances make between 20 and up to 50% of the GDP from time to time. In general, in literature, remittances are seen as often resilient and counter-cyclical, meaning that when economy is going through hardship, usually remittances are increasing, the received remittances are increasing. But since this region have experienced several global and regional shocks, we are challenging this assumption that there could be structural breaks in remittances dynamics in those countries. So we are asking three main research questions. First is, do remittance flows to post-Soviet countries exhibit structural breaks after experiencing the external shocks? And second, are those shifts synchronized across the post-Soviet countries? And some of the shocks we are identifying are related to Russia from geopolitical perspective in the region. So we are also testing, we are also analyzing to find out to what extent are remittance dynamics in post-Soviet economies dependent on Russia's economic performance. So we are focusing on 11 post-Soviet economies, and the time period we cover is from 2000 till 2024. The data source from the World Bank indicators, and the main interest of the variable is the remittances. So we are focusing on the remittances specifically. We are defining 4 different external shocks, 2 global, 2 regional. So 2008 global financial crisis, 2014 annexation of the Crimea by Russia, 2020 COVID pandemic, and finally 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. We are applying several complementary methods. First, we use CHO test to identify the structural breaks at several major shock years. Second, without specifying the years of the external shock, we are using Bayer-Perron multiple breakpoint detection test to find out unknown years of structural shifts in remittance dynamics. And finally, in order to test the role of economic situation in Russia, like how remittances are dependent from the economic performance of Russia, we are applying fixed effect panel regression. The initial results, the overall trends indicate that in majority of the selected countries, remittance inflows are generally volatile and indicate upward trend in the long run. And we also see that remittance dependence vary by the countries. The countries such as Tajikistan, Kyrgyz Republic, Moldova, they have extremely high ratio of dependence from the remittances, between 20–50% of the GDP. And Armenia, Georgia, Uzbekistan, they have relatively moderate dependence. And Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, like with the minimal ratios. In this graph indicates the red vertical dashed lines represent the years of external shocks chronologically from left to the right. And we see some general pattern here, that we see that the years of shocks are aligned with the sharp turning points in the remittances, the dynamics of the remittances. And this is the result from the CHO test we applied. And we see that the results are primarily statistically significant. So this confirmed that the results indicate that the remittance dynamics shift during the after the measure global and regional shocks. And the result from the second test. So in this test, we didn't predefine the years of external shock. So we just let the test to identify it itself. And we see that most countries still experience multiple breaks, typically around 2008, 14, and 2021, which are not totally different. Like it's very similar to the results of the previous test. And finally, the result from the fixed effect regression, panel regression indicate that remittance flows to post-Soviet economies are statistically significant from economic performance of the Russia. Therefore, like 1% increase in Russia GDP raised the remittances to the post-Soviet economies by 1.2%. So to conclude, in this research, we are indicating that remittance flows in post-Soviet economies are not perfectly stable and resilient, and it shows the clear structural breaks during the major crisis periods. And these breaks are often synchronized across the countries, so it means that those countries are exposed to the same global and regional shocks, and some of them originating from the Russia. And finally, remittance remain highly independent on Russia's economic performance. So this may have some policy implication for those countries to indicating the need for diversification strategy and more economic resilience strategies. Thank you very much for listening. I'm to take my seat.
Thank you very much. Actually, you saved some few minutes. The next speaker, please, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to
But
Case.
still 12 minutes.
Yes, and thank you to Case for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm enjoying it so far. Do we have? Okay. First two slides are saying some reason why I thought this topic was interesting in the context. First of all, looking at what's been happening with the Eastern partners. I've been working on the Eastern Partnership for many years, and it's really focused on half of the partners. So half who were in the WTO and not in the Eurasian Economic Community. Very little happening with respect to Azerbaijan, and Belarus is obviously in the naughty corner since 2021. And this kind of surprised me because what's changed in February 2022? First of all, we know there's been the moves towards pathways to membership for Ukraine and Moldova. That's clearly for Georgia. But almost everything else has been about Azerbaijan. The first immediate worry was what we do about gas. That's not coming from Russia. Got to find alternative sources. Azerbaijan's one of the alternative sources. What's going to happen to our overland rail travel, which goes through Poland? Poland's a major affected by this. If you don't want it to go through Russia, you don't want it to go through Iran, there's only one other way. It's got to go across the Caspian Sea. It's got to go through Azerbaijan. Baku's the big hub in all that. And more recently, 2 months ago, we have peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan back in the headlines. So Azerbaijan seems a blank in terms of Eastern partners, but it seems to be very much affected by what's happening in recent years. Second thing that triggered me to think about this was looking at the case report. I thought this is really good. I really liked this. It's about macroeconomics, about finance, about trade. And then these 2 pages, 98 to 99, said logistics. And I was really disappointed by those pages because what they did, they took the World Bank's Logistics Performance Index and see, what is that like for the countries that we're dealing with here? to me, it's not really about logistics of internal domestic trade that's been affected by the war. It's the overland trade, the Eurasian trade. And in particular, it's this trade between the EU and China that's grown really rapidly since 2011. It's been very resilient despite shocks like the annexation of Crimea. COVID actually did wonders for the overland trade because it messed up the maritime trade between East Asia and so this is growing very rapidly, and then sanctions hit it. You're not supposed to use Russian railways. Well, actually, although they've been identified, a lot of the trade did continue. The German car companies in particular continued to send the components through Russian railways. We've heard about a lot of the avoidance of sanctions. You know, we know of companies that continue to use the Russian railways to send their exports from Europe to supposedly Kazakhstan. So we see this sort of continues, but primarily there's a big search for an alternative route. I'll talk about this slide very quickly. I've been working on it for the last 10 years. So I can talk about it for an hour if I wanted, but I'm sure the chair would not like that. We see this very rapid growth of overland trade. Background very quickly. We all have heard about the Silk Roads and the overland trade with camel caravans, lasted for millennia, showed the potential for trade between East Asia and Europe, even though the trade costs are very high. The Portuguese discovered that you can go around the foot of Africa, and since 1500, the trade is dominated by ships. They become very efficient, particularly after the container revolution. Drives in part the rapid growth of manufacturing in East Asia. Round about 2010, 2011, the German car companies in particular are looking for ways to ship components to their Chinese factories that are quicker, more reliable than maritime trade. At the same time, China's had its Go West policy. Computer companies, Foxconn that assembles Apple products, HP, Acer, all build huge factories in China, in Western China. Around Chongqing producing over half of the laptops in the world by 2013, from zero in 2008. They also want faster, reliable trade, and that's going by rail, mostly through Kazakhstan, through Russia, through Belarus, through Poland, to Germany. The main terminals being Duisburg or Łódź. You see the numbers, very, very rapid growth. Right. What's happening here? Okay. What happened after February 2022 is a search for alternatives that don't go through Russia. Yeah. The fastest alternative is coming from China through Kazakhstan. That's that northern line. Across the Caspian Sea, you get to Baku, and then you go through Georgia, ship across the Black Sea, or go by rail through Turkey. The EU was very strongly involved in this, partly because the EU transport policy had got to the Black Sea just about in 2021, and they're looking about extending this focus on encouraging modal shift from road to rail, encouraging standardization of things like signaling and so on and so on. So the EU commissioned a report immediately from the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, to say what should be the way to do this, and that's the lower red line is recommended by the EBRD, and the EU is committing somewhere between 10 and 18 billion euros to upgrade this to make it competitive. There's some competition between alternative routes. There's a little bit of a connection to a previous paper about the fertilizer trade. That the black line is a route coming from Uzbekistan through Turkmenistan. That has been particularly used by Uzbekistan to export fertilizers to Europe and Turkmenistan. So these things are interconnected here. What can we say about the EU policies that are going on? Well, the EU is committed to upgrading the Middle Corridor. It's part of the global gateway. The Trans-Caspian Transport Corridor Coordination Platform is being set up by the EU in 2024 with this large commitment from the European Union, also a commitment from the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and the Islamic Development Bank. So this is saying it's a major push. It has to go through Baku. If you look at the map, there are alternative ports on the east coast of the Caspian Sea, but on the west coast, if you don't want to go through Russia, you don't want to go through Iran, you have to go through Baku. Baku is going to be the big hub for this trade. And we know from other studies in international trade, hubs are very important. You know, why would okay. So we've got this emphasis on the middle corridor. We also have an emphasis on energy, which we'll hear about from other speakers here. That's very clear that Azerbaijan is a...
I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. There's also concerns clearly in Brussels over Azerbaijan human rights and governance, particularly in the European Parliament. In Azerbaijan, there are concerns about the EU, which they consider to have supported Armenia in the war that went on for about 30 years between the two countries. But in August 2025, a little bit out of the blue, there was peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia in Washington. And part of the peace deal was an agreement by Armenia that the United States would build the Trump route for international peace and prosperity, the trip that would link Azerbaijan directly with its exclave of Nakhchivan and from there to Turkey. So, sorry, this is not a great map. It's the best map I could find. So that little green bit is the part that's in conflict. You know, Azerbaijan, after its military success, wanted to enforce transit rights through Armenia. Armenia resisted that. The trip has been a way to get over the problem by saying we're run by the United States. So this is connecting Baku to the Turkish hub of Kars. Turkey is putting in substantial funding to upgrade the red strip to dual track. So we see that this is another element of improving the links between Central Asia, China, on the one hand, and Europe. It also shows that this is uncertain which is going to be the best route. If this becomes the main route going through the trip, then it cuts Georgia completely out of the middle corridor.
You have 3 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm almost at the end. So we can think about what is involved in this incorporating the middle corridor into the EU transport network. You know, it also involves other countries. The Central Asian countries are extremely supportive. They all have a key of their foreign policy is multi-vector diplomacy, which means having more than 2 major powers being of interest to them, meaning Russia and China. So they're very much welcoming of the EU being part of this. EU policy towards China is much more complex. We could spend a lot of time on this. Officially, the EU policy is that China's a partner for cooperation, an economic competitor, and a systemic rival. This would seem to be a good area for cooperation, but most recently, particularly with the Turnberry Agreement between von der Leyen and Trump, it seems that the EU is committed to not cooperating with China, despite past evidence of that. So it's very uncertain where that is actually heading. So a lot of uncertainty, but the bottom line that I want to emphasize is that although Azerbaijan is not a candidate for membership, it's become a much more important neighborhood partner due to trade and energy. And I mean, I tend to be a not very financial and very real economy kind of person. I think this is a very important part of it. Following Karsten's example, I end with some publicity that if you want to know more about the middle corridor and particularly the relations between Europe and China on this, I have a book forthcoming in January 2006, which is on the right. And I'll leave you to look at that and think about whether you want to get your library to buy it or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next presentation about weaponization of Russia's energy. Mikhail Krutikhin, please, the floor is yours, and you have 12 minutes.
Well, yes, thank you for inviting me to this event. And well, weaponization is a new word, and it's one of my favorite words since 6 years ago when I was invited by US and German researchers to participate in their mutual research about such an interesting thing as weaponization of interdependence. It was absolutely new because, well, you can weaponize your dependence. If someone is dependent on you, you have the leverage on the other party, and you can press it into, well, you can exert some sort of a political or even military blackmail. There are, of course, some exceptions when the dependent party is trying to weaponize trade relations with the other party, such as Hamas and Israel, because Hamas is a parasite on Israel economically, and when they decided to launch the war against Israel, it was weaponizing the dependence, but in a very paradoxical way. Not the dependent party started to weaponize its relations. Well, we see that you can weaponize your trade relations, such as Gazprom was doing it against some countries that received its gas, playing with the prices of gas. If the European recipient of that gas behaved, well, incorrectly in the eyes of the Russian government. And, for example, the buyer can weaponize the trade relations, such as in the case of China's leverage over Gazprom, in the power of Siberia pipeline, in some other cases, and so on. But it is very hard to weaponize interdependence. And we have a very long story of interdependence in the form of trade relations, energy relations between Russia and the Europeans, because for quite a few decades, it was mutually beneficial. It was, well, good for both parties, and both parties dependent on such shape of relations. And even when in some times of pressure from the United States, for example, which insisted on stopping the pipeline projects from Russia to Germany, if you remember those conflicts about pipes for there were some conflicts, and the relations survived despite the political circumstances. For example, in 1968, there was the invasion of Soviet and Warsaw Pact forces into Czechoslovakia, and in the same year, the Soviet Union concluded new contracts for gas delivery, first to Austria, then to Italy, and then to Germany. So it was not an obstacle, and it was a very strong type of interdependence. Then what happened with this interdependence, and how Russia decided to weaponize this state of affairs? Well, the Europeans were well prepared for that, because the disruptions of Russian gas supply started in 2005. It was in Belarus first, then 2006 and 2009, and then it was 2012 and then 14. And so the Europeans had plenty of time to get prepared for such inconsistencies. But the reaction was not sufficient, was very weak. And we can just make guesses about what caused the reaction of Europe to the Russian pressure, to the disruption of gas flows for political reasons on orders from the Kremlin. We believe, well, some observers believe that EU leaders trusted Putin, and you can meet such an opinion in very many media publications. Well, maybe they believe that interdependence is very stable, very solid, and cannot be broken, and then maybe some Russian lobbies played a role. And a very slight question that maybe there was some case of corruption as well in Europe, because, well, we know that some of the European leaders received tremendous funds from Russia. So even the leaders of some major European countries. So there was some reason for the Europeans well, to demonstrate a very weak reaction to the peril of having their gas flows terminated. Oh, sorry. What was that? Sorry. Yeah, the next one. Well, it is very hard to understand what was the motivation of Putin to cut down, to weaponize that interdependence. Well, definitely, he assumed that the EU was very weak, and it was it couldn't resist the blackmail. Usually, the Russian, after April 2021. When Gazprom started decreasing gradually the supply of gas to Europe, starting with the cut of supplies to the underground storage facilities, then under several pretexts, closing down some of the pipelines, then insisting that the payment comes in Russian rubles and so on. And so gradually it came to an almost standstill. And the Russian media started saying that we are intent to freeze the Europeans. They will come down to Moscow on their knees and stop supporting Ukraine and accept all the terms of Gazprom and Mr. Putin and so on. So here we I think in the West there is some wrong assumption of motivation of Putin. It shows in the idea of economic sanctions against Russia. The idea is economic sanctions are going to make the Russian economy so weak that Putin is going to stop the war. No, it has not happened for almost 3 years right now. And I do not think that economic sanctions are going to stop Putin from continuing the war. In fact, history must teach us something. For 25 years, Putin has done so many, has inflicted so much damage on the Russian economy by his actions. Then I can imagine a picture that the West, well, just imagine, the West comes to the Kremlin and says, we are going to make more damage on the Russian economy and you are going to stop the war. And then Putin may answer, well, I've been doing a lot of negative things for the Russian economy for 25 years. Thank you for continuing my policies here. You are doing exactly what I've been doing so far. Basically, we see that it's a very special sort of economy. And this model of crony capitalism, well, some people say it's a mafia-like structure. No, because mafia is a business establishment. They care for profits, they care for minimization of costs and so on, by criminal means, of course. But in Russia, when we see that the government cares not for the development of the country. Yes, they have corruption, they have graft, they have nepotism and a lot of other things, but the idea of developing the country or creating foundation for its economic future, it's absolutely not the ideas that nourished by the Kremlin.
3 minutes left.
So it's not exactly mafia. And since for the past 30 years, I have been in the consultant business, consulting foreign investors who wanted to come to Russia and invest heavily in oil and gas. My idea is not just analyzing the situation, but doing something to recommend what is going to be done in the future. And I see that recovering the role of a reliable partner for the EU will be very difficult, if not impossible, in the foreseeable future. Because even if the dust settles after the war, it will take a lot of time to change not only the Russian legislation, which discriminates foreign investors and creates an impossible investment climate in Russia. We do not know who is going to be the administrator of a new economic order in Russia, because you cannot trust those people. Well, I think the time is almost over. Thank you. I will.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. We see that the changes that must be done in Russia will include the dramatic change of the legislation. For example, it's a clear discrimination, absolutely. A foreign investor cannot, for example, launch its own oil or gas production project on the continental shelf and even at a larger scale onshore. And then a reform of judiciary system must be done. Because when I ask foreign investors, what is the main obstacles in Russia? They say, maybe it's, discrimination of foreigners. No. Maybe it's corruption. No. We've seen the countries with the worst corruption. What is the main problem? No safety for investment. They could be any property, any investments, and any projects could be taken over by people from Putin's administration, and you have no guarantees at all that you can continue safely. The main advice that we've been given to foreign investors: please do not invest in Russia as much money as you would would make you worry about that. So don't destroy your business by investing everything or a great part of your business in Russia. It's very dangerous. Thank you.
Because we're, I'm sure, going to be on a tight schedule. And what I'm intending to do in this session, we're going to be looking at papers on the Southern Caucasus and Central Asia. The first 2 papers are on South Caucasus, so I'll ask those 2 presenters to present. We'll have a short Q&A that are directly at those papers. Then we'll have the 2 papers on Central Asia, and then we'll have a more extended question and answer about the whole thing. So 15 minutes each in your presentation. So we'll start off with Hagemejer on scaling up potential in the South Caucasus. You might need the...
Thank you. Before the presentation will be available, let me briefly introduce our organization. Actually, I am affiliated with 2 organizations, with Modex Advisory Company and Access. Access is Armenian Center for Socioeconomic Studies. It was established in 2020, and our aim is to promote evidence-based policymaking in Armenia. Originally, this study was funded by Friedrich Naumann Foundation. It was regional and in South Caucasus from Azerbaijan and from Georgia presented different papers. And our paper was scaling up trade potential in the South Caucasus. For this conference, I have just updated figures to present to you and discuss developments. Before starting the main presentation, it doesn't work. Let me briefly provide some digest regarding recent developments. During your session, Marek asked about possible developments between Azerbaijan and Armenia. First of all, I want to inform you that in 8th of August in Washington was pre-signed peace agreement. And currently it is under regulation of Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. So it is somehow protected. As a first step, literally a couple of days ago, Azerbaijan lifted ban on transit of goods through the territory of Azerbaijan to Armenia. And in upcoming couple of days, we expect first grain from Kazakhstan through the territory of Azerbaijan and Georgia to Armenia. So it is very positive development from our perspective. Regarding our paper, the main purpose of our study was to estimate potential of scaling up trade in our region. So between Armenia and Azerbaijan, between Georgia and Azerbaijan, and between Armenia and Georgia. We used methodology of a trade complementarity index. I believe some of you maybe was interested and studied by using this method. I will try to present some outcomes of our study. First of all is our descriptive statistics on our trade. Our main trade partners are Russia, China, and Iran. I have to say that overall, Russian invasion of Ukraine had positive impact on Armenian economy, not only on Armenian economy, but also on Georgian economy and on Azerbaijan economy, particularly in terms of external positive demand shock. And Armenia became one of channels to re-export Russian goods to other countries and European or Western goods to Russia. As you can see, average gold over the period, annual average, we discussed annual average figures from 2019 to 2024, and share of gold is about 15% in Armenian import. Actually, it is re-export of Russian gold to other countries, primarily United Arab Emirates and China, Hong Kong, with small processing operations. This is Armenian export. As you can see, again, gold. In Armenia, we have original production of gold, but it is very small compared to these figures. Originally, we used to export copper, cigarettes, and also Armenian brandy. You can see this figure. Our main export partners in terms of merchandise trade are Russia, United Arab Emirates, but it is due to this gold re-export, and also, of course, China. Since China has big smelters, we are used to export our copper concentrate to China for further processing. As for Georgia, you can see breakdown of Georgian import by countries: Turkey, Russia, US. In terms of US, I have to mention mainly about re-export of goods and particularly passenger vehicles. We know that Georgian business entities used to import vehicles and then re-export to other countries, including Russia. This is a breakdown of Georgian export structure by good categories. The same exercise we did for Azerbaijan. Oh, sorry. Sorry. We did the same exercise for Azerbaijan. The main trading partners are Russia, China, Turkey, and we've main product categories: vehicles, petroleum, oils. By the way, as you can see, and we guess that Azerbaijan imports oil for internal consumption and exports its oil to European countries. It's like some kind of re-export operations of Russian oil. In contrast to Armenia and Georgia, export profile of Azerbaijan is very concentrated. About 87% of total export came to oil and gases. It will be even very surprising for you, at least for me, Armenia's population is about 3 million. Azerbaijan's population is about 10 million. But when we excluding petroleum gases and oil and copper from Armenian export, because it is mining product, our export is bigger compared to Azerbaijan. So their economy is mainly rely on export of oil and gases. As you can see, the main trading partner of Azerbaijan in terms of export is Italy, because their pipeline Baku-Ceyhan Tbilisi is main destination for this pipeline is Italy. Also, Turkey and Israel benefit from export of oil and gas from Azerbaijan. Based on these statistics, we calculated trade complementary index for both three countries, vice versa. And you can see that overall complementarity between our economies is very low. And the highest possible export is import of Armenian goods by Georgia, about 40%. Other indicators is very low, very, very low. Anyway, this is a export of Georgia to Armenia. As you can see, the main part comes to spirits, and most of these spirits also are exported from other countries to Armenia. Georgian companies used to export brandy spirit to Armenia, then produce Armenian brandy to export Russia, because Armenian brandy is very well known in Russia and accepted product. In case of Georgia, we estimated that potential increase of export to Armenia can vary between 80 million to 100 million USD. It is not big figure, as you can understand from these statistics, but it is positive to our economic relationships. In terms of Armenia, we used to export cigarettes, semi-finished products, and glass containers, electric generating sets. And overall, our potential to expand in Georgian market is bigger. You can see about $250 to $310 million. Main products are cigarette, copper, glass, chocolate, coffee, other food preparations. We did the same exercises for Azerbaijan and Georgia. Overall, the highest potential to expand export in neighboring countries is Azerbaijan's opportunities. They have a lot of opportunity to export and to enter Armenian and Georgian market. In terms of Georgia, it is almost 600 or $750 million. And the main export goods are petroleum oil, also petroleum gases. This is a relationship between Georgia and Azerbaijan export relationship. The main product is live animals, also waters. Georgia used to export Azerbaijan, and overall potential for Georgia, again, not so much, from $150 million to $190 million to expand export of Georgian products to Azerbaijani market. The main products can be cattle, sheep, fertilizers, because there is a big factory in Georgia producing fertilizers. Currently, as you know, due to conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, we do not have economic relationship, and even there is conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But anyway, we believe that there are some potential to cooperate between two countries. As I said, already Azerbaijan lifted ban on transit of goods to Armenia, but it can be some economic initiatives which can de-escalate situation between our countries. And I believe that peace building should start from economic cooperation, because strong economic ties can reduce tension between two nations. For example, in Armenia, we have aluminum foil production factory, which used to work on Russian raw materials. But due to, this factory worked by processing Russian aluminum and exporting aluminum foil to EU and US under GSP system. Currently, there is US exposed 200% import tariffs on aluminum originated from Russia. So we can cooperate with Azerbaijani side to import Azerbaijani aluminum, produce aluminum foil, and export EU and US. Of course, even Turkey. Such kind of projects can effectively de-escalate situation between our nations and increase economic potential of two countries. In terms of Armenia, we can, by the way, here you can see consumer products, which will be very, very difficult to promote in Azerbaijani market because there is negative attitude toward Armenian goods. But also there are some projects which can implement it and can provide positive effects. Another opportunity between Azerbaijan and Armenia, performance of Armenian thermal power plants on average higher compared to Azerbaijani thermal power plants. So we can import natural gas, produce electricity, and export to destination which Azerbaijan want. Because currently Azerbaijan exports electricity, mainly Turkey, but their performance lower compared to Armenian. So we can like in terms of contract manufacturing, we can import natural gas, we can produce electricity and export to Turkey. Overall, we also provided several recommendations which can promote economic cooperation in South Caucasus, including facilitation of B2B interactions, conducting more in-depth analysis of trade between our countries, to seek special status in Eurasian Economic Union because current regulations do not allow Armenia independently decide on economic, mainly customs tariffs or other aspects of bilateral relationships. Also, we suggest to establish free trade zone on the border of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, near Red Bridge, which is a well-known place in our region. Also, promote Armenia-Azerbaijan B2B cooperations. So it is shortly about our study, which we conducted in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Hakas. Thank you for keeping to the time limit very well. Now, Georgia will take it in a more in-depth view about Georgia.
Okay, I think it's on, right? Okay, first of all, thank you for having me, and it's an honor to be here. Secondly, my paper is still a developing paper, and it's not an academic paper like the ones the colleagues presented. It's more a policy paper where I'm observing a phenomena. In this case, it's the migration of people and financial flows and their impact on Georgian economy. However, again, it would be dishonest for me not to start everything with heat checking, and the reasoning why I'm using this idea of heat checking Georgian economy, and obviously the photo of the protest. I do understand that majority of the audience has the idea what's happening in Georgia, has the idea the Georgian government in a few years ago took a full swing into the authoritarian regime, introduced a set of laws to limit any alternative voice which are targeting the NGOs and think tanks like the one I'm working for, where the directors or the executive directors are under investigation, are threatened up to 10 plus years of imprisonment because of the support of the coup, which never happened or never was intended to happen. But also, the things that are happening in Georgia are developing so fast and they are so overwhelming that even for me, for a person who has to follow those things, I can't always keep up. So I really want to talk about very little about what's happening right now. Right now we have more political prisoners in Georgia per capita than in Russia. We have from fines to be on protest and cover your face or obstruct the roads. We moved into the imprisonment, and fines were 3 times the size of the average monthly salary, and now we moved into having a 15-day prison sentence for those people who would be on the protest covering their faces or be on the road obstructing the automobiles or whatever. And on the first instance, on the second instance, that would lead into imprisonment for 1 year. Anyways, and looking to Georgia, again, I'm trying to look at the Georgia in the sense of Georgian economy and not involve the politics into it, but it's very hard to, but I think it's misleading to look at the economic development and not take into account the political process that Georgia is going through right now, hence the heat checking. Again, as I mentioned, the paper is still developing, and the guiding questions I'm trying to answer are how the migration capital inflows, how migration and capital inflows change consumption, housing, and banking. If those things or those changes are here to stay, or they are temporary and they will be back to normal once there is a ceasefire or once the migration follows reverse, and what are the policy trade-offs. The first indicator I will looking at would be the immigration, and the immigration has always been an ongoing topic in Georgia, but because mostly of the negative net immigration, not rather than having a migration into Georgia. But what we see on the data, and while it's well-known phenomena that starting from 2020 start with the war, there has been the increased immigration to Georgia. And the few interesting points about that has been that the migration of Russian citizens has increased around 6-fold. Well, there was initial increase from people fleeing Ukraine and coming Georgia, but there has been a different trend because the Russian citizens have never left and they stayed into the Georgia, while the majority of the Ukrainian citizens can be traced that they have left the country, and so those are a bit different to different scenarios. There is also the migration increase has happened. On the chart you can see it has other, but I think it was mostly people coming from with the citizenship from the Central Asian, and post-Soviet countries, and there is also a large chunk of Georgians who were coming, Georgian citizens who were coming back from Russia or escaping the impact of the war. And actually their transition has been lagged, while the majority of Russian citizens left Russia to come to Georgia in 2022. The Georgian citizens, which I think the logical explanation would be they were not threatened by the idea of forced to go to the war, but rather than they decided that there was no economic reasoning to stay in Russia and maybe go back to home or go back to Georgia. The migration flows have been I guess, followed by the spike in remittances. And on the remittances side, the chart, I think colors do disservice to the chart, but if it was visible, then you would see that the change in the remittances coming from other countries other than Russia has been following the steady path. So there has not been a huge change in that. While in case of the remittances coming from Russia, there has been like this spike in 2022 and then slight decline to normal by 2024. What has been changed by the increased migration has been the one of the indicators is the increased household expenditure, especially on the consumption. And we see that the spike actually started around after COVID, and well, it's logical, but the double-digit change on a yearly basis has continued throughout the following years of 2020 and 2023. The largest areas, or the areas which have been most impacted and which have the largest change on the annual basis would be the urban areas, again, the areas which have been more attractive were to settle Tbilisi and Batumi. To be fair, the increased household expenditure has been positively reflecting on the economic growth from the due to the demand side dynamics. Another area which has been impacted by the migration flows has been the residential price property, residential prices, and we see the spike or the quarterly, I guess, change has been double digits starting from Q4 of 2022 to Q2 of 2024. Again, the most impact was coming on the cities, on the urban areas, on Tbilisi and Batumi, rather than any of the other cities or rural area per se. And alternatively, the migration has also impacted the whole business sector in Georgia. We've seen the number of businesses registered by the Russian citizens spike in 2022 and following 2023. But to be fair, the number you see before 2022 is for the years. Well, it's not the prior chart. Prior column is not just for the 2021, but rather the few years. I think starting from 19. That's when the data was available. And we see the slowdown of the registrations. Majority of the companies have been registered by the Russian citizens without having a Georgian partner or having a Georgian surname. And the type of the organization, type of the companies registered reflect quite well, they are reflective to the existing structure. So majority of them are small enterprises, around 10-ish% are the medium-sized medium-sized enterprises, and around 1.1% is the large companies. So obviously, this has been as the previous presentee mentioned, that the Russian invasion in Ukraine has been positively reflecting on the countries like ours in terms of economy. So we saw the demand-driven GDP growth. We also saw that the residential sector benefited the most. I think the biggest winner of this process has been them. The yields on rental properties and the number of sales of the residential flats or houses has increased. We also see increase in retail and service activity. Some of the sectors that have been struggling post-COVID have been are doing good now, and especially in the sector of domestic tourism, to the HoReCa sector. On the downside, obviously, it comes with the risk and downside. Well, the first which comes to mind is the housing affordability and the squeeze on the locals having the opportunity to access the same market. We see that the obvious political and reputational risk, but I would say that the current government is not really worried about that. Then there is the financial integrity and vulnerability, which I will continue on. Well, intention is that the paper will cover all of these areas separately, but as to limit the size of the presentation now, I'm going to talk just about the financial integrity vulnerabilities. And I think there are three core components to that. There is a legislative change and recent amendments that create these vulnerabilities and create space for them to be abused. There is a rise in illegal business activity, and there is the reporting rise in cases of money laundering, and so on. Okay, on the legislative and structural gaps, well, Georgians have been very proud that we had were on the top ranks in the ranking of doing business, because it's super easy to register the business and there are a lot of tax incentives and so on and so forth. But obviously that coin also has the darker side, right? And the darker side has been that one, we saw the spike of the number of new ventures or new companies has been overwhelming. It gives people who want to avoid the law a lot of leeway and a lot of space or hide a lot of space and a lot of ways to hide their intentions or illicit activities. On the tax side and nasty side, Georgian Parliament recently passed, and they passed it at the very time of when the mass protests were happening, a law which initially was intended to be short-term and allowed the offshore assets to be transferred to Georgia without any tax or any charge. However, I think that has been, I have to double check, but I think they extended it for till at the end of 2026. So if you have any assets in the foreign offshores, you can bring them to Georgia. We won't tax you. On the illegal business and money laundering, so one of the topics which I've been following and has been quite interesting, and I think it bears more than just the financial or economic implication, but also degradation on the value basis, has been this emergence and widespread emergence of so-called call centers where they try to defraud international victims into investing in some shadow assets or something like that. Well, they have been, and to be fair, it's a very, it has been connected. There has been a lot of investigations by international media outlets or the companies like organizations like OCRP about the same topic, and they have been connecting it not just to current government representatives, but the ones from the previous government as well. And I think that the biggest issue with those is that they also create this feeling among youth that you could earn triple or 10 times more by doing something very immoral. But if there is no law, then which would prevent you, or the police is not policing about it, then it becomes more appealing for the kids or the youth. On the reputational and structural risks, again, such developments obviously create those, and I will double down on the idea that I'm good. That there is no. I don't think the Georgian government is very bothered with that party with the reputational risks at the moment, and every time there has been discussion about that, they always find that there will be some investors coming from the Middle East, and they said that there is coming this 6 billion investment into the development in Georgia from the MR group or something like that. And on the rising money laundering cases, this has been actually a very interesting part, because and it's every day. There is reported a new case of money laundering. We got a few days ago, few Russian citizens have been arrested laundering money through crypto schemes. We have former prime minister from the Georgian Dream government saying that he was involved in corruption and money laundering. We have the person arrested who was trying to brought in Georgia the amount of money which would be around 1 point something% of whole GDP to launder. So it's a developing thing. I don't know on the scale of where what would be the real scale of money laundering in Georgia, but again, that would be one of the interesting parts of the paper when it's finished, hopefully. Again, thank you. And as I've said, it's a developing paper, and any input is and suggestions are welcome.
Thank you, Georgie. So at the beginning, we'll have time for some questions that are specific to these two papers, and then we'll move on to the papers about Central Asia. So, and there'll also be time at the end for general questions. So anyone have any specific questions they want to bring up? Okay, and one thing I found interesting in the first paper, you mentioned some opportunities for cooperation between Armenia and Azerbaijan, right? In producing goods for exports to third countries. To what extent do you think that's feasible in the coming years, or to what extent is there a legacy of animosity from 30 years of being essentially at war?
To be honest, we even presented this recommendation to Prime Minister of Armenia, and we are discussing to consider also include this recommendation to the agenda of mutual negotiation rounds. But I think in terms of B2B products, it is possible cooperation, let's say, during upcoming 3 years. But in terms of B2C or consumer goods, it is currently not feasible due to conflict and due to negative intention of people, and also this negative attitude toward each other. But I believe that economic cooperation also in the frame of TRIP project, you mentioned about it, and also possible involvement of Armenia in mid-corridor will significantly increase probability of mutual trade between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Any comments? Okay, well, let's move on to the Central Asia papers, and then we'll have general discussion at the end. Okay, so these are, I think, are really interesting because they're very closely related, the two papers. So it's good to get the two different views.
Okay, thanks. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for having me. My name is Eric Iskakov. I'm a research director at the Center for Strategic Research in Kazakhstan. And today I'll be presenting my working paper on sanctions, relocation, and entrepreneurship development based on the case of Kazakhstan. As you'll see later in this presentation, this paper is closely related to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, sanctions imposed on Russia, and the question whether these sanctions really worked well. So, is it you or me clicking? Thank you. So, as you all know, in February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, and many Western countries imposed sanctions on Russia. And within weeks, we saw unexpected spike in foreign film registration in the country bordering to Russia, that is Kazakhstan. And given that both countries are the members of the Eurasian Economic Union with the free movement of goods, services, and capital, some kind of business relocation from Russia to Kazakhstan and the consequent spike in foreign film registration in Kazakhstan was expected. However, this raised a critical question. What was the true motivation of these companies? Was Kazakhstan's economy becoming more attractive for Russian businesses due to the sanctions? Or is it just the mere intent of these Russian companies or foreign companies to be registered in Kazakhstan just to evade the sanctions? And by doing so, they are just using the free borders of Eurasian Economic Union to still have the ties with Russia. So if this is the case, then we would expect that many Russian companies or foreign companies are located in the regions bordering to Russia, so that they will still keep the ties with Russia, with the Russian market. And this was my main research question. To do this analysis, I collected the data from Enterprise Statistical Register in Kazakhstan, which is only daily basis, and I converted then this data set on the monthly basis, because all other control variables are on the monthly basis in my data set. What is important in this data set, in this register, is that within this register, I could distinguish between the firms that were registered by foreign legal entities and foreign individuals. So they have specific codes for this. As I said, I control for regional characteristics like demographic, wage, crime rates, business environment, and financial infrastructure that was acquired from the National Bank statistics. So since I have this foreign firm registration, I decided to divide the set of the companies into two subsets. The firms that were registered in the regions that were closer to Russia, and the firms that were registered in the other regions. So can you click on the map? So this became my treatment group, the regions that were close to Russia, and the regions that didn't have any border with Russia became my control group. This one my treatment group, and this one a control group. Okay, thanks. Back. No. Okay, that's it. And of course, I had two time periods. One is before the sanctions, which is pre-treatment, and right after the sanctions. So since I have two subsets and two time periods, I decided why not to use different specification. And in my analysis, the foreign firm registration becomes the outcome variable. I control for regional and monthly fixed effects. Yeah, and of course, like in all diff, I test for pilot trans assumption. And as for robustness checks, I use the placebo fake treatment to confirm the timing of this effect. And yeah, this was all done just to identify the causal effect of this relocation and check whether the border regions offer higher utility for sanction evasion due to proximity to Russian borders. So when we check the results of this analysis, we see that, in fact, border regions experienced 24 to 34 additional foreign firm registration per month following the sanctions. And as I said, I test for parallel trans assumptions and the results hold. And I checked the placebo tests 6 months before and 6 months after the treatment. What is interesting in this placebo test is that 6 months after the treatment comes to the period of September, October 2022. And this is the right time when the so-called partial mobilization was declared in Russia, when many Russian people flooded to the countries like Georgia, Kazakhstan, and even Mongolia. And since we don't see the significance in this placebo test, we can conclude that these people who were running from mobilization, in fact, were not escaping their businesses. They were just mere people who are trying to escape the war, escape the mobilization. And yeah, these results are interesting, but I try to go further and check who drives this migration, who drives this business migration, whether these are individual entrepreneurs or corporate entities. And I found that almost all the effect is captured by the foreign individuals, not corporations. I relate this to the fact that individual entrepreneurs have lower relocation barriers and lower relocation costs, so they can freely migrate from one country to another with a lower cost, while corporate entities have higher organizational inertia and complex regulatory requirements. So it is not easy for them to change one country to another. So yeah, to conclude, I want to discuss the question with which I started my presentation, the sanctions. So from the results of this preliminary results of this presentation of this paper, we can see that when the sanctions are imposed on one country that is highly integrated to another country or regional economy or the world economy, these sanctions can be depreciated by the firms that relocate from one country to another. And yeah, from entrepreneurship side, we can see that it is not the Kazakh economy giving the opportunity for these businesses. It's just the mere interest of these businesses to evade the sanctions while still keeping the ties with the Russian economy. And yeah, this is all I have for you today, and thank you.
Thank you, Serik. And now we'll move on to Vyaponizations, which tells a variation on the same theme, right?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Ilras Kadir. I'm a PhD student at KU Leuven, fourth year. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. And so the topic of my presentation is Russian firm entry and labor dynamics in Kazakhstan. So basically it relates to Serik's presentation. So as Serik mentioned already, more than 15,000 Russian firms entered to Kazakh market after the war. So in this paper, I want to see the impact of these firms on Kazakh economy. So this is a large-scale firm entry, and definitely it has some outcomes for the economy. So the central question is, how did this entry shock affect workers, domestic firms, and the economy overall? So Serik talked about the regions that these firms entered to Kazakhstan. Now I will show how the Russian firms differ in terms of year, size, and sector. So in 2022, around 9,000 firms entered to Kazakhstan, and in 23 it's less, 6,000 firms. And in terms of the size, 95% of these firms are micro firms, around 3.5% are small firms, and only a small share of firms are medium and large size. In terms of sectors, wholesale sectors such as wholesale, retail, trade, ICT, and professional scientific activities lead with highest entry. And for moderate entry sectors, it's transportation, construction, and education. For low entry sectors, accommodation, food, healthcare, agriculture, and so on. So what happened to Kazakh economy during this time? Number of vacancies rose from 95,000 in late 21 to 175,000 in late 23. Unemployment fell from 4.9% to 4.6%, and also average wages rose. And one negative impact of this Russian firms on Kazakh economy is that domestic firms exit of domestic firms doubled from in 22 and 23. So we have this dual effect, stronger labor demand and higher wages, but greater pressure on domestic firms. So this work based on these three literature strands. First, it connected to job creation and dynamics. So we know that young firms, or can I call them young firms, because mostly these firms are relocated from Russia and they have businesses in Russia before, but still since they are in the new country, they have to participate in job creation. I mean, at least some of them. Also, it relates to job flows in transitional economies, such as Kazakhstan. And then I built the model based on the Mortensen and Pisarides, based on search and matching framework. And then for firm dynamics, I use Hoppenheim and Rogerson and the Clementi Palacios frameworks. And then finally, I built the heterogeneous firm general equilibrium models, where I connect macro and firm interactions. So these are the research questions that that guide my analysis. So what are the short and long run macro effects of foreign firm entry? How do entry shocks propagate throughout frictional labor market? And what are the welfare and policy implications of this entry shock? I use, to answer this question, I use 3 data sets. It's for business register data from 2015 to 2023. It contains entry, exit, size, ownership, sector, and region information. Then I also use aggregate data from National Bureau of National Statistics to calibrate the model. Also, I use the number of, I use the Headhunter website to collect the number of vacancies in Kazakhstan. So let me talk about the model overview and the main mechanisms that affect that builds my model. So I build a heterogeneous firm general equilibrium model with the frictional labor market. So when firms entry, they had to hire workers. So they post vacancies and match with workers. So more vacancies means tighter market, higher wages, and more separations as workers see better opportunities. So then hiring becomes costlier for incumbents, for domestic firms, and then profit falls, and there will be more domestic firm exit and less entry in the future years. So this Russian firm entry triggers this chain. Entry rises, vacancy rises, wages rises, but also domestic firm exit rises, productivity rises, but then the domestic firm entry falls. So this plot shows the how my model captures the real data. So it captures the data pretty well, and especially for COVID shock and this Russian entry shock. Then this plot shows the impulse response functions. We can see that number of total firms increased by 3% because of this Russian firms. Output increased by 1%. labor productivity increased by 1% and unemployment rate declined by 0.18 percentage points. Also, we can see that number of exits increased by 40%, which is huge numbers. And yeah, number of entrants increased due to the Russian firms by 40%. This is the quarterly data. And so we can see that the impact of these Russian firms are significant. And this plot shows the counterfactual analysis. If there will be no war and no Russian firms entered to Kazakh economy, so average wages would be smaller and unemployment rate would be a bit higher, and output would be lower, vacancies would be lower, and then also firm exit will be lower in Kazakhstan. So before going to conclusion, I would like to show the also difference and difference result, reduced form. And here I consider 209 districts in Kazakhstan. And then the independent variable is regions where there is a high entry of Russian firms interacted with war after 22. And we can see that the effect on the growth of average wage is around 3%. Effect on the growth of exit is around 12%. And for labor productivity is around 4%. And for the output is 5%. So this is the reduced form results. So to conclude, clearly, the war-induced entry of Russian firms reshaped Kazakhstan economy. Wages rose a bit, unemployment fell, but for domestic firms, for domestic firms, the profit declined, and also there is a pressure from the competition. And we have short-run disruption, but depending on the future, in the long run, productivity will increase. But again, it's good for workers, but bad for the local firms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really like both of these papers because it takes a little bit behind the generalizations that Russians. And it's the small firms, the small and medium enterprises that were developing. And then the second one looks at the labor market. And I think it's often kind of ignored. You can pick out losers. Some domestic firms lost out because a more efficient new firms started up. But when you look over a fairly short time, wages have gone up, efficiency's gone up, and we see sort of a positive effect there for heterogeneity.
We have a keynote address starting online, and this panel is also scheduled to end at 3:20. So I will be very strict on the 12-minute time that you have without being insulting, as Dmytro said this morning. So I will give you a 3-minute warning when you have 3 minutes left. And yeah, so without further ado, I will hand over the floor to Dmytro Boyarchuk, who will do a presentation on the Ukrainian war economy.
Does work? So, Ukrainian economy, how it goes through the war. First of all, we had this deep contraction in 2022 for obvious reasons, for Russian intervention. Due to Russian intervention, it was GDP dropped by 28.8%. It was a minor recovery by 5.5% next year, but after that, the economy is stagnating. Unfortunately, for every year we forecast some speed up. Actually, not we, but IMF and other international organization. But for sure, the speed up so far didn't happen. GDP after 4 years of Russian aggression, Russian full-scale Russian invasion, still remains near 20% below the pre-war level. It didn't recover fully, and if you assume, for instance, that GDP is growing near 3% per year, it will take more than 10 years to reach the pre-war level for Ukraine. The structure of growth. After GDP plunged by near one third, the main drivers of growth, let's say, were public spending and capital investment. Public spending were primarily related to spending on military, on defense needs, and there was substantial increase on payments, remuneration for servicemen, and capital investments, or especially on the first year, 2023, when some part of the occupied territory was liberated. There were large spending on recovery, rebuilding of destroyed or damaged capacities, production capacities or infrastructure. But for now, the situation is that the main destruction is happening in the areas where repairing doesn't make any sense. It will be destroyed next day. Consumption, there is a big role of consumption, again, due to substantial increase in payments for servicemen, but this factor is fading out. In per capita terms, the picture looks much better due to drop in the population. But still, you will see there is a kind of invisible ceiling Ukrainian economy cannot break already for many years. Actually, for first war in 2014, and now we have much better and bigger invasion, but also due to poor quality of governance. Industry was substantially damaged, but it still remained a serious part of economy, near 20% of GDP, more for domestic production, not for exports. Now industry is stagnating due to regular airstrikes and due to 2 consecutive years of poor crops. For the moment, agriculture is the backbone of the economy. 60% of our commodity exports is agro exports. Before the start of invasion, Ukrainian agro collected near 80 million metric tons of crops, grains. Now it's below 60 million metric tons, and for the last 2 years, the situation was like we had relatively not very strong harvest results. As I mentioned, consumption was a strong factor of growth, specifically in 2023 due to high pay of servicemen. But now the statistical base is high, comparative base, and last year there was increase in taxes. The war tax was increased. That's why consumption and private consumption is in its growth. Current account expanded widely for sure, but for the first several years it was not really noticeable because we received a lot of support in the form of grants, which made look current account not that big. Now this line part of support is rearranged in the form of loans, and we expect current account deficit to reach unseen for us 15% of GDP by the end of the year. If you will have a look on trade deficit, what is the reason? For sure, the first shock after the start of Russian invasion, but after that, the main reason of growth was due to expanding energy equipment imports, mainly machinery imports. Again, due to regular, almost daily strikes on energy infrastructure. Here is the structure of exports. You will see that more than 60% is agro production, and actually exports is stagnating. Picture on imports is a bit different. Imports is growing strongly. Again, machinery, fertilizers, and energy imports. And here is, I would say, the main reason of our resistance and stability have the financial support from the West. Near 40 billion every year of injection. This year we will receive more than $50 billion. Two main instruments for now are a so-called Ukraine facility funded from EU and ERA program funding, which arrives under Russian assets as collateral, and reparation loan for at least 140 billion euro is under discussion. It's not decided yet, but very likely it will be decided. From this point of view, due to substantial support, we are even able to accumulate substantial gross reserves. They again are at historical level, and from this perspective, from this graph, it looks relatively okay. Budget, lion part of spending are on defense needs. Spending almost doubled. It's circulated that near 50%, but I would claim that it's more than 60% of public spending are related to defense. Due to this reason, deficit is big, huge for us, more than 20% of GDP. If you will have a look solely on the deficit of the budget, it will be smaller, but you need to add to this number grants that we received and which are accounted as revenues. Public debt was not growing that fast on the first 3 years of the war. There was shock due to exchange rate. Shock, public debt increased, but public debt was not growing, again, due to line part of our support was received in the form of grants. But now it's changed, and by the end of the year, we expect that public debt will exceed 100% of GDP. Monetary policy, actually it was tightened, then it was loosened, and but at some point the National Bank of Ukraine spotted that there is growing pressure, depreciation pressure, and they again started tightening under risk of people withdrawing their hryvnia-denominated deposits. They're trying to make hryvnia-denominated deposits more attractive in this way. Banking liquidity is very high, but not much companies could get loans, both due to general not very favorable economic situation and companies also not thriving to get more loans. They're just in the mode of survival, not in the mode of development. Inflation is in double digits, and the main contributors to inflation are foods and utilities. Food prices are natural due to not very good crops over the last two years, and utilities again due to regular air strikes, because retailers, for instance, they tend to install power generators, and like we have regular electricity cutoffs like right now. And you can imagine that price of every unit of produced electricity on power generator, when it is imputed in the price of commodities, it's quite substantial.
2.5 minutes.
Okay, another dimension of inflation. Again, you can see that foods and utilities are contributing the main role. National currency hryvnia, it remains predominantly stable recently. Actually, when the invasion started, there was shock, exchange rate shock. Hryvnia was moved to another level and was fixed. Later in 2023, the National Bank changed from fixed exchange rate to controlled floating rate, and it adjusted exchange rate a bit over the last year, I would say due to political reasons. The hryvnia is left stable, and the price of this stability is very high. National Bank pays $2-3 billion of intervention to maintain hryvnia stability. On some months, it even more than $5 billion. And about our reforms on the agenda, reforms are moving in a very difficult manner. But actually they are moving, unfortunately, very slowly and very difficult, and everything is related to EU integration. And probably you hear how it was developing very badly through the summer months when authorities made an attempt to dismantle anti-corruption bodies. Luckily, under pressure of civil society, this didn't happen, and we are still moving in, I would say, in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmytro. And now we will move online to a presentation from Alexei Shpanov-Yukhtar on the technological resilience and technological inequality in wartime, the case on...
Okay, so let me start.
Did you full screen? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Hi, colleagues. Nice to meet you. Unfortunately, can't be present in person. I hope after our win, we will meet in person. So my this is about technological results.
Sorry, we can't hear you that well. I don't know if that's on our end or if you have any possibility to move closer to a microphone.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So also Dmytro in previous topic described detailed key trends of Ukraine economy, but I want to highlight a couple of important things to answer why we speak about resilience in Ukraine economy right now. Yeah, we have a shock for GDP for a lot of economic indicator at 2022. Our GDP decreased up to 13%, but in the 23 and 24 year, and right now we expect growth. Not a lot, but growth during war, it's very important. Inflation, after it was more than 25%, right now return back to normal values, because in regular for Ukraine, we usually have 10-15% inflation before full-scale invasion. Interest rate after NBU's decision to slow down interest rate, and right now it's near 15%. And what is also two key factors that we have a pretty stable national currency, hryvnia. We expect to have a little bit downward trend at December, as we have each year by year, but it shouldn't affect us more than 10% in a year base calculation. And also employment. Right now we have an unemployment rate approximately near 12%. And it's also very good, but we have a lot of inequality in the labor market, but it's other topic to discuss. Role of technological factor in right now. I've shown a chart last 5-year trend of role of IT sector in Ukraine economy. So it's increased role in GDP up to 3.5%. And if we combine also information about sole entrepreneurship and employee that works in IT sector, right now we can say that up to 5-7% employment generated by IT sector. It also right now one of the top 5 branches in our export, and it's provide a stable employment, what is very important. Second one, why we look so intensive to IT sector or technological sector, it's because it also have a political PR of our country impact, because our key importers, it's the United States, it's Great Britain, it's a European Union country. I think that these countries cover year by year up to 18 or 19% of our export. Third one, it's that external refugees who works in IT sector can stay and works as Ukraine resident, pay taxes in Ukraine, but be abroad. And second one, for internal refugee, it's one of the sector where you can restore your job even after a couple of days after war started in 2022. We expect that we have a small downward trend in the last couple of years due to different reasons, but we expect the general growth trend will be in the next years. What were the key factors of technological resilience? Why Ukrainian economy continued to generate revenue, generate gross domestic product, and also banking sector also have ability to work and to provide services for business and for people. There are four important things that was launched during war. First one, it's a national roaming. Three biggest mobile operator in Ukraine introduced a national roaming. It means that you can connect to any network of these three mobile operators and have access to mobile internet and have access to mobile network. Mobile internet after 2019 in more than 18% of our country, it's a 4G technology, and it means that this speed more than enough to like 90% of operations for end users, IT guys, IT colleagues, and it's provide option to remote option and ability to work remotely. Second one, it's NBU's decision, National Bank of Ukraine decision at 8th of March that allowed banks to store and process data, including client data, in the cloud abroad. So previously, we have infrastructure in a lot of banks. We have a lot of virtual machine, but physical servers placed only in Ukraine. After this decision, we first of all receive option to process data fast and safety, and we avoid risk to destroy our physical servers. Third one, territory coverage. Mobile internet and fixed internet cover more than 95%, and some researchers told and investigators told that it's up to 98%. It means that territory of Ukraine was covered on enough speed internet and mobile, fixed and mobile internet on enough level. And government development. Right now we are in five rank at the government development index, increase up to 97 position, and using DIA, it's a national government service, mobile app. You can remotely achieve like thousands of government services without visit any institutions in person. And these four factors provide the ability to firm relocated and or physically relocated employee, but not relocated some firm as firm, but provide goods and services, and also help people to be online and receive needed government and finance services. But during the war, we also receive a situation that we have a technological inequality. And we have a technological inequality in two different dimensions. Regional dimensions, the different regions have a different access, and sectoral dimensions, the same, but for branch of economy. And we have a controversial impact of technological inequality, that it can be additional opportunity, additional advantages for business and for people, but also we receive additional dependency from energy and from high quality network. And it's add one important thing that right now, internet provider, mobile provider became a critical infrastructure. It's additional objects that need to be defended from by Air Force, that need to be defended by different rev options. And the same
have 3 minutes.
And the same for sectoral dimension. But also we have a less dependency, because we can by using modern technology we can reduce number of employments, but we have a more dependency from a high quality or specific qualified person who should support all this infrastructure. And based on this three map, how we have distributed GNDI per capita, mobile network access quality, and internet access quality, you see that usually we have high quality at key region like Kiev, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk. And also we have like a cluster of regions at west part of Ukraine. And it's also very important thing that when people start relocate to west part during war, they have available infrastructure for this relocation. Not at all regions. Here you see that Lviv much better than Zakarpattia, but that we have this option and have this possibility. And also we made some research about how technologization and technological resilience impact income of people, and we find out that in the years by branches, that average cost per hour, labor cost per hour, and the share of software investment in the total capital investment percent have a strong straight relation, and coefficient correlation in the last 5 years more than 95%. It means that a firm who continue, and you see that peak we have in 222, exact in a full-scale invasion war, that firms who continue investment in a software also generate more cost to his labor. And it's interesting what is the like a start factor of this one, more wages or more investment, but this relation was strong and will be detailed in next articles. Thank you, colleagues. Ready to your questions.
I'd not seen much analysis on the disparities and discrepancies within the Ukrainian economy before. So we're now going to move on to a presentation by Alexander Sishenida on balancing efficiency and public acceptance, how to design carbon revenue recycling in Ukraine.
Hello, my name is Alexander Sichnieder. I'm a research associate with Green Deal Ukraine. Green Deal Ukraine is a think tank based in Berlin, and our aim is to establish an independent climate and energy think tank in Kiev, in Ukraine, by 2027. And today I want to talk with you about how to design effective carbon revenue recycling in Ukraine in order to establish effective carbon pricing in Ukraine. And I guess I assume that there are some people who might think decarbonization policy, climate policy, we don't care about that now in Ukraine. We should not care about that now in Ukraine. And let me just maybe verbalize these arguments in one slide. At the end of the day, it's just the very bad summary of Dimitri's presentation. So yes, there's a war going on in Ukraine, and obviously this war has economic consequences. So we do have an inflation rate of 12 to 13% in Ukraine. We do have a key interest rate of 15.5% in Ukraine as of June 2025. We do have few long-term loans in the banking sector available. And that's why the financial capabilities to invest into emission reduction is very low throughout Ukraine. Not only in order to invest into emission reductions, obviously in order to invest into anything. So and a decarbonization policy is at the end of the day a policy which shifts future costs from the future into the present. Doesn't really make sense for Ukraine, does it? I think it does. And this slide is on why we actually should care about climate policies in Ukraine already right now. So I assume that most of you know this excellent book, Poor Economics. And if you know this book, you will know that I'm actually abusing it now because it has a lot of brilliant insights. But for the purpose of this presentation, I want to break it down to actually only one sentence. And this is whether a choice is rational or irrational depends on the timeline regarded. And with its EU application, just 4 days after the start of the war, after the full-scale invasion, Ukraine made clear that it doesn't want to only stay in the present. This war isn't about, fighting this war is not about only surviving the present. Fighting this war is about shaping its own future. So it's actually like official government position of Ukraine to regard the present, yes, but also regard the future. And with EU accession, we do have a couple of obligations coming around. And one of the most important obligations within the climate and energy sector is the integration of Ukraine into the EU emission trading system. So in 2025, we had a carbon price generated by this trading system around 80 euros and 100 euros. Ukraine also has a carbon tax rate in place. But this carbon tax rate has a little bit less than €1. In order to integrate into the European Union, this domestic carbon price needs to be gradually increased in order to prepare Ukraine actually for its accession. But Ukraine has introduced this carbon tax back in 2011, and since then it barely increased it. And now there's a war going on, as we all know. So raising this carbon tax is even more difficult than it was in the last 14 years. So we're gonna skip this slide for now and go already to, please disregard the RQ1, the title of this slide. What I'm presenting to you now is a working paper under development. So RQ1, please replace it by the word challenge. So this is just like what came out of like the last 36 hours of work. This is not a, it is a question. So, but it's a challenge. So how can we actually raise public acceptance of the introduction of effective carbon pricing in Ukraine? And I would say we do that by addressing the three key challenges regarding carbon pricing. The very first one is that we do have a present bias in Ukraine, obviously. We do have an environment of insecurity, of uncertainty and risk. Obviously, there is a present bias. The second challenge is the relative cost to impose carbon pricing is for poorer countries tendentially higher than for richer countries. So if Ukraine has a carbon price of 80 euros in place, this is relatively more costly for Ukraine than it is for Germany or for Poland. And the third challenge is, remember the first slide, remember Dimitri's presentation. Ukraine's present is very, very costly, and introducing this additional carbon price onto Ukraine's economy actually imposes additional costs. So how can we solve this challenge? And actually the literature is pretty clear on that. It proposes 3 solutions. For the first one, for the present bias, you could say that, so actually there's evidence in the literature that if people experience a policy once, at some point resistance against this policy is fading away. And this would call for a phased approach towards carbon pricing. The second challenge, that relative cost to impose carbon pricing is for poorer countries tendentially higher, could be solved by international financial transfers from richer countries to Ukraine. And the third challenge, the imposition of additional costs, could be solved by revenue recycling that offset the immediate costs generated by carbon pricing now by actually bringing the revenues back into Ukrainian economy by, for instance, supporting decarbonization projects. All these challenges are pretty well addressed within the literature. What is not so well addressed within the literature is actually now the real research question of the working paper under development, how to design effective carbon revenue recycling in Ukraine. So what we can take from this literature is that fund structures in general can be very helpful for doing that. They have 3 big advantages. The very first one is that they increase visibility. They increase visibility of recycling these carbon revenues, and by increasing visibility, they actually they are able to increase social acceptance of carbon price policies. The second one is that it can help to target specific purposes of these revenues. So actually literature suggests that within Ukraine, environmental earmarking is most popular. Using these revenues generated by carbon pricing for environmental earmarking would be the most socially acceptable option within Ukraine. At least this is what OECD study is saying. And the last and third, and one of the most important insights from the literature is that such a fund could allow for international co-governance. And so, for instance, if international partners are involved to 50% in the governance of this Ukrainian decarbonization fund, then obviously they should also contribute to its financial streams, for instance, to 50%, which would be reasonable. And by doing so, such a internationally co-governed fund could actually double Ukraine's carbon price revenues and be maybe an incentive for the Ukrainian government to increase its own carbon price. And here you can see, so Ukraine has a national energy and climate plan, and within this plan there are 2 different scenarios, and based on one of these scenarios, you could estimate that by 2030 Ukraine could generate out of its carbon price a revenue of around about 3.3 billion euros annually. And if you double that with international financial streams, this would mean that such a fund could raise up until 7 billion euros per year. And actually what you can see, this is calculated with the price of 38 euros per ton of CO2. As I said in the beginning, we do have a level of 80 euros. So eventually, as Ukraine integrates more and more into the European system, the fund could raise even more revenues than in this example here. But this is just like, this is supposed to be a realistic calculation for the nearer midterm future, at least. Yeah, and what you can see also on this graph is the red line. The red line indicates 15.5 million euros annually, and these 15.5 million euros is the funding of the current decarbonization fund of Ukraine. Ukraine has a decarbonization fund already in place. This is so since last year, but you could say that it basically failed its task. And so the Ukrainian government projects that it will need, only for the decarbonization of the industry, 11.9 billion euros, only for the industry sector. So you can actually see that like these 15 euros don't help anything. And just like for very, very brief analysis why this fund actually failed. So actually the original goal was to attract international funding to this fund, but because there was these international partners were not involved in the governance of the fund. There was a lack of trust, and that's why the only one who contributed to date was UNDP with like a little bit more than 200,000 euros. So yeah, what's the solution? There are a couple of several interdependent challenges to solve. The very first one, yes, in order to integrate into the EU, Ukraine needs to decarbonize. This decarbonization fund could be actually a meaningful support instrument for this decarbonization of Ukraine, but it can be only effective if there's an effective domestic carbon price in place, which is it not. This is not because there's a war going on. It's super politically sensitive to implement this effective carbon pricing. So next challenge, how do we solve that? We could mitigate at least this sensitive topic of Ukrainian carbon price with international financial transfers from EU countries, for instance. Okay, next problem. The existing the existing decarbonization fund actually shows that these international financial transfers won't just happen just like that, because they didn't happen within the past year. So what do we need to change? The governance of the fund. And how this a future governance of such a fund could look like, you can see on the right side of this slide in this little house. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Alexander. And so we will now move north to Belarus, and we will have a presentation from Lev Lvovsky on economic developments in Belarus.
Okay, does it work? Yeah. So I want to say thank you for invitation, and let's have a quick recap of what was going on in Belarusian economy in the most modern period since 2020, and especially since the beginning of Russian invasion in Ukraine. Can we go? Sorry? Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so Belarusian economy, by its type, it's a small and open economy. Small means that it's a price taker. It cannot control any large enough international markets. And open means that we were actually quite involved in trade. Exports plus imports in Belarus usually are 120, 140% of GDP, so we are really dependent on trade. When the war started, there were expectations that GDP would fall by 10% or even more because of that fact, because European Union was one of the main trade partners as well as Ukraine, and we've lost basically 30% of our trade just in one moment. Nevertheless, there was fall in 2022. It was 4.7%, so it's still the largest fall of Belarusian GDP since 1995. But not as large as models and as economists expected. And even more, since then, we actually went for very steep recovery. steep by Belarusian measures, because the previous 10 years, between 2010 and 2020, average growth rates were 1%. And here, given the sanctions, given the war, given the loss of trade partners, we are growing quite fast. So since 2021, last pre-war year, we had record growth of GDP plus 6%, but that's nothing in comparison when you would look at real wages. I think any European country would be envious. We have a growth rate of real wages 35% in comparison with pre-war period. Main winner of this interwar period was manufacturing sector. Main losers were transportation, so we are still minus 40% of volume of the pre-war volumes of transportation, and IT, which used to be, before the war, one of the fastest growing sectors of Belarusian economy. It started to recover a bit, but it's still below its pre-war level. So how did it happen? How did we got into this rapid growth? The answer, of course, starts with R and ends with Asha. So the main growth factor, of course, was this huge increase in external demand coming from Russia, both from civil demand and military demand. Because statistics is all closed and everything is secret, it is of course hard to say precisely which part of Belarusian export goes for Russian military and which part goes for Russian civil consumption. Especially it's hard because what Belarus produces for Russian military is mainly non-weapons, but, for example, food, which can go to Russian soldiers, or oil products, which can also go to Russian tanks, but it's the same oil products as that can go into just any Russian car. So it is quite hard to guess how much do we export for military demand using some econometrics magics. I would say I would have scientific guess that actually it's quite small. About 1% of Belarusian exports goes to Russian military. The rest goes to Russian civil demand. And because we had such a surge in external demand and problems with own demographics, so we in general had negative demographic trends plus emigration after 2020, this created this surge in real wages. So basically we have real lack of labor. And it brought us a new growth factor, which is internal demand. Household consumption is now plus 25% in real terms in 2021. Plus, because we have serious sanctions, actually there are more sanctions on Belarus than on Russia, people don't know where to put this additional 35% of real wages. Well, they consume, yes, but they have, very limited investment opportunities and savings opportunities, which brought to spike in real estate demand. So people buy apartments. They don't know how to save another way. They cannot. It's, for example, much harder to buy like euros and dollars than to buy apartments. And of course, excess monetary and fiscal stimulation, which also brings this new demand in the economy. Now, not everything. So that's kind of how we got here during the last 2-3 years. Nowadays, this this feast is kind of getting over. Russian civil demand is shrinking because of rates hike in Russia. Russian economy was also overheated by the war, so demand from Russia is stagnating. And in the recent months, like last half year and more, the only growth factor that is left is actually internal demand by Belarusians, which have this super high real wages. Now, this is all like quantitative facts. So quantitatively, everything looks very good. Well, maybe like the best in Belarusian history or something like that. But we should not miss qualitative changes that happened in Belarusian economy, because it's important for long-run predictions and long-run resilience. So first fact that happened with Belarus after the war started is, of course, collapse of diversification. Before the war, the formula in Belarus was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So 1/3 of trade was with Russia, 1/3 of trade was with former Soviet Union countries. Major trade partner there was Ukraine, and 1/3 with the European Union. So after the war started, now share of Russia is 60 to 70%, depends on month that you look at, and another 15 to 20% of trade goes through Russia. So it also depends on Russian goodwill, or etc. It loses Russian logistical networks. As I said, yes, cool down of Russian economy directly affects Belarus, so we cannot diversify anyhow. It directly brings slowdown in external demand and manufacturing. But Belarusian authorities, how to say, they never give up. So if there is no demand for things that we produce, we would produce it in any case. Here comes this graph on the right. This is a graph of unsold inventories as a percentage of monthly production. It's not first time that Belarusian authorities play this game. They produce when nobody buys and hope that something would happen in the future and everything would be sold. Last time they actually won in this lottery during the COVID, when many countries were closed, like produced less. Belarus never had curfews. It kept producing, but in post-COVID recovery, well, everything was sold, more or less. So it was all good. Nowadays, we are getting in the same place. Nowadays, we actually even higher. So we again produce and don't sell, which, as you can guess, makes financial situation of the enterprises much less stable. Sorry? Yeah. Now, another, of course, factor is overheating. As you can guess, if you if you throw lots of new money into the economy, plus huge external demand, plus not enough people to produce everything, you get overheating. If you've read economic textbooks, you would think that it would also lead to some inflation, which would cool everything down. But you would be wrong, because in Belarus, we don't follow Western textbooks. In Belarus, we control prices. There is administrative price controls, which, which makes inflation actually look very good, but which makes financial situation of enterprises even weaker. As I said, main driver now is interior demand, but it also creates pressure on current account, with people switching from domestic consumption to consumption of foreign goods. We potentially have a bubble on real estate market, because again, it's used just as the last resort of saving. And even though that we have administrative price control system, inflationary pressures, they still mount up, and well, we have potential problems in future. Yeah, I'll finish with just this slide. It's the most recent news. As you know, Ukrainian army became much more successful in attacking Russian oil refineries. They tried to do it a year ago, but that time they were not as successful. Nowadays, they're better. Situation is very dynamic, so it's hard to say how much of Russian fuel output is lost. Different sources say from 13 up to 40%, but the situation changes every day. Can worsen with new attacks, or can get better with if there would be less attacks. And Russia went to buy its oil products from Belarus. Can Belarus replace all this lost fuel output in Russia? The answer is no. Belarus, at maximum capacity, can produce around 10% of Russian yearly demands, but much more likely number would be 3%. Nevertheless, Russia kind of forces Belarus to sell everything that Belarus can sell. You would think that it brings more opportunities to Belarus, that we can sell these oil products at better prices, better conditions. The answer is actually no, because there was no spare capacity of oil products production, so Belarus had to breach all the contracts that were already signed before. And there are many issues, of course, and not the last of which is that in the first place, problems with Russian oil products happened, well, because Russia attacked Ukraine, and Ukraine attacks Russian oil refineries. So replacing Russian oil refineries with Belarusian production clearly puts Belarusian refineries much higher on the list of Ukrainian targets, which would be another serious problem if it would happen. And I'll finish here and happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you. And now we move on to the last presentation from Anastasia Lukhina.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for invitation. And my presentation is concerning to labor market dynamics in Belarus and IT sector development in Belarus under the pressure of migration, mass migration. And first of all, I would like briefly explain you our estimations about how many Belarusians lived their country for last 4 years. And there are some uncertainties in this sphere because according to European statistics, mass media, for example, used usually European statistics, which shows us first resident permits in which Belarusians held in the EU. But all these permits, mostly it's just long-term visas, not like short-term or long-term permits for living in EU. And as you see here, there are quite huge figures. For example, in 2022, 0.3 million Belarusians held first resident permits in the EU. In 2023, the figure was approximately 0.28 million, and in 2024, Belarusians was recorded hold 1.17 million first resident permits. And most of them was issued by Poland, but also very important country for moving, for living for Belarusians was Lithuania. And here we see, we calculated how many people from Belarus moved to Lithuania, and figure here is quite clear. So we have Lithuanian statistics and the number of first resident permits, and there is a correlation between the growth of first resident permits and the number of Belarusians who resided in Lithuania at that time. In Poland, there was another situation because you can see that a number of valid first resident permits at the end of the year is different from, for example, compared with a number of Belarusians taxpayers at the same year in Poland. And this why? Because many Belarusians, for example, hold or got Poland Business Harbor visa or Pol card, but as they still live in Belarus, but traveled from time to Poland. And that's why we had such kind of differences. That's why we decided to use some method in order to calculate how many people live from Belarus live in Poland. And a first approach was based on calculating the number of adult Belarusians in Poland separately and separately distinguishing between men and women, as well as estimating the number of Belarusian children under 18 using the data of social benefits. I don't explain the total method because I don't have enough time, but according to this approach, we got that about 172,000, 181,000 people from Belarus live in Poland for now. And we also should add to this figure that some Belarusians have obtained Polish citizenship over the past 5 years, removing, and we, of course, these figures are excluded from Belarusians who live in Poland, and the number of such people is 70.5 thousand people who got citizenship in Poland in 2020-2024. We also used another second approach, social demographic approach. The objective of this method was verify previous calculation using an alternative methodology. And the total number of Belarusian, according to this methodology, residing in Poland practically the same between 175 and 188,000 people. And based on these two approaches, we can conclude that from till at the end of 2024, about approximately 200,000 Belarusians. I added here also Belarusians who got citizenship in Poland, lived in the country. And in this case, the total number of Belarusians in the EU at the end of 2024 was 267,000 people. On the one hand, it's not a huge figure compared with Ukraine, for example, from Ukrainian people, but of course we should mention that Belarus is not so big. It's a small, quite small country, and what about economic consequences of this migration? Belarus has already lost more than 2.74% of its total population due to migration only to the EU countries. And some Belarusians have obtained Polish citizenship, as I said. National statistics also may still include Belarusians who reside abroad, but they calculate them as people who live in Belarus. And in recent year, of course, some Belarusians moved to other countries, to Kazakhstan, to Russia, of course, Georgia, and it's approximately more than 130,000 people who also moved to other countries. And just for an example, almost the entire population on the Minsk district now resides in the European Union. So this is just for comparison. And another, the second part of my presentation is related to the impact of such migration on the labor market and information and communication sector, IT sector. So as Lev mentioned, we have quite big problem with labor on the labor markets because there is a lack of people now. And for example, from 2018 to 2024, the Belarusian economy lost more than 200,000 people. Just for your in order to better to imagine the situation, for example, at the beginning on October 2018, there were about 99,000 free vacancies on the labor market. But at the end of August 2025, the number of open vacancies on the labor market was more than 200,000 places. And this, of course, created such situation created competition between companies for a labor force. And as also Lev mentioned, we saw a huge real wage growth for the last 4 or 5 years. Okay. Then we should say that labor shortages were an important factor of slower GDP growth and higher inflation in 2024. And immigration and low birth rate in Belarus also putting pressure on the pension system. For example, at the middle of 2025, the ratio of the average old age pension to the average wage was about 35%, which is below 40%. That is usually international standards of minimum ratio. And several words about impact of migration on the dynamics of Belarusian IT sector. The share of employed population in the IT sector decreased from 3.4% in 2021 to 2.9% in 2024. And the share of the IT sector in GDP also decreased significantly from more than 7% in 2021 to less than 5% in 2024. The plans to become a regional IT hub, of course, has been postponed in this case. And according to Polish, at the same time, quite a lot IT specialists moved to Poland, to Polish market. And for example, according to Polish statistics for 2024, 13% of all Belarusians were employed in the IT sector. And the last slide, my slide, is conclusion. Approximately over 95% of Belarusians in Poland now are children or people below retirement age. And in Belarus, in contrast, more than 24% of total population are people above working wage. The rising share of elderly people, of course, inside of the country is increasing the burden on the social pension fund, and the continued outflow of young Belarusians and their children poses long-term challenges for Belarusian labor markets, including continued labor shortages and especially of skilled workers. Thank you very much for my presentation, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
We are moving now to the last session. And I would like to welcome Anders Oslund. Let me just few sentences about Anders. I think that most of us know Anders very well, but just as a reminder, Anders is very well known scholars on economy of transition, on Ukraine, Russia, on European Union, and many other related topics. He is author and co-author of many book publications. He worked in several renowned institutions, like Stockholm Institute, Transition Economies. He was many years ago director, and he worked in Brookings and Peterson Institute for International Economics, in Carnegie, in Atlantic Council. So the range of experience is very broad. He is also associated with case practically since the very beginning of existence of our organization as a member of International Academic Board. And since 1999, if my sclerotic memory is correct, he's chairman of this council. So I think he's absolutely right person to deliver a keynote address, which will be the last point in our conference. So Anders, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Marek. Thank you for your invitation and your kind words. Do you hear me properly? So I'm very happy to talk about this, and I congratulate you, Case and you and all the participants on this important project, because the Eastern Partnership is really important, not only for the countries involved, but in the East, but also for Europe. Europe needs this integration in order to revive. At present, we are seeing that Europe is far too passive and weak, and it needs new, fresh stimulus from the East in order to move forward. I have followed Ukraine and its economy actually since 1985, seeing it how complicated it was and how it gradually has got more and more shape. I was in Kiev last the second week of September, and let me follow up with a few observations I heard Karsten and Dimitro talking about it. And of course, the first impression is, as Karsten said, everything is surprisingly normal. Everything is in the shops, and you can sit down normally in a cafe and eat, and you can cash money. But this is the new logistical system. This is no longer World War II. Neither Russia nor Ukraine have rationing or price controls. Instead, what I think we should look upon as the two key problems of the war economy, apart from the war destruction itself, it is the cost of a war. In Ukraine, it's about 50% of GDP. This is what the Western countries paid during World War II. So this is a real war economy. In Russia, officially, the federal expenditure is 8% of GDP, which is high, but not a real war economy. We should probably add 2-3% of GDP from the regional budgets, but it's far less. And the other point is enormous labor shortage, both in Russia and Ukraine. And Dimitri touched upon that. People are afraid of being mobilized, conscripted. So this is an issue, and also it was touched upon. I walked around in the mornings in Kiev, and I saw that very few people were out in the streets. So I asked why, and got the answer that many employers allow their workers to stay home in the morning to sleep, because you can't sleep at night, and then you need to sleep in the morning. So until noon, there were surprisingly few people out. So these are adjustments. This is a war economy, but you can say that the impact is much less than you would have expected. My second point is that what I saw in Kiev was an immense pride in the new Ukrainian drones. I talked with Alexander Kamishin, the advisor of President Zelensky on the military-industrial complex, and he claimed that now there are 1,500 startups that are producing arms, mainly drones, but not only. They are cheap, they are effective, and much better than what Westerners can produce. It takes 2 to 6 weeks to produce, to move from prototype to serial production. Serial production is done in a decentralized way in underground workshops. Commission told me that a year ago they could produce 1.5 million drones. Now they could produce 10 million drones this year. But the point is rather they need to have a higher quality, greater efficacy, and they need money. So they could produce last year for $10 billion. This year they would be able to produce for $35 billion, but they don't have that much money. So what they come to is that the Ukrainians don't ask primarily for arms any longer. A few things like long-distance rockets, but that's about it. Instead, they ask for financing. And this, of course, shows how important the Ukrainian arms industry will be in the future if Ukraine just wins the war. But Ukraine needs $100 billion a year to keep going, and preferably it should be more so that Ukraine can win the war. It's now increasingly a matter of money. Half of this money is needed for the budget for next year, $50 billion, and at least $50 billion for arms. If Ukraine gets less money, it means that Ukraine will not be as successful in the war as it could be. And since Donald Trump became president of the United States, the US has not provided any financing whatsoever for Ukraine. The few US arms that are coming to Ukraine, they are being delivered, purchased by NATO for EU money. And it's a very small volume. And we are now in a situation where Europe and the international financial institutions have to do it all. President Trump is not intent on doing anything to support Ukraine. He has not done so, and it's not likely to do so. This is the fundamental thing that I think we need to realize. I'm sitting a few hundred meters away from the vice president's residence here in Washington right now. And how can the financing be done? Well, there's only one substantial source, that is the immobilized Central Bank of Russia assets that are sitting in the Euroclear Bank in Brussels. And last night, the European Council refused to take that money in any way to provide Ukraine with the financing because of a Belgian veto. I mean, the European Union really needs to get its act together. Belgium Belgium should not be allowed to veto that because it wants to indulge in war profiteering, because the rent of the money is going to the Belgian state to a significant extent. This is just unacceptable. And now we will have to wait until December when the European Council can have another go at it. And it was now said that the money could come through in the second quarter of next year. So the financing for Ukraine is now a serious concern. I'm of course Swedish myself, and the Nordic and Baltic 8 countries are all in favor of Ukraine and supporting it, but it's not enough. They are not sufficiently big economy. Then another point is sanctions on Russia have to be much stronger. And here we just had a happy surprise that the UK, the EU and the US all sanctioned the 2 big Russian oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft. And it's often said that the sanctions are not effective enough. No, of course not, but they are quite effective. So the general expectation now is that Russia will have a growth rate of 1% a year for the next 3 years if the current situation continues, and it could get worse. The Russian exports have fallen by roughly 1/3 from 2022 to 2023 and stays at that level. And of course, it should come down. So now a big critical question is, will China and India continue and buy Russian oil, or will they be deterred by these sanctions? I had not expected that the Trump administration would do anything against Russia. So to me, this is a big positive surprise, but that also means that I have no confidence that this policy will be maintained. And the other part is while most of the Russian banks, I think it's 80% are now of the banking activities are cut off from SWIFT, all are not. And for example, Raiffeisen International is a big hole in the financial sanction, being the biggest Western bank in Moscow. And then what should be done is prohibited tariffs. We are now seeing that the European Union has imposed tariffs at the level of 50% on agricultural exports from Russia and Belarus. Do that on all products and make sure that it holds. The US amazingly has no tariffs at all on Russian or Belarusian products, which particularly applies to fertilizer that was discussed here before. The potash from Belarus, as far as I understand, is not subject to any US tariffs. Impose big tariffs on all of it. Moving over then to what are the key to the current development. We have seen that, first of all, Ukraine needs sufficient financing for the budget. That has been $40 billion a year. Now it will be $50 billion a year in order to keep a relatively low inflation. Right now it's 12%, likely to fall to 9%, they say, by the end of this year. It's a bit high, but nothing that is really worrisome. And the second precondition, it is that Ukraine can ship its exports through the Black Sea. And that has been possible since September 2023. And I think that tells us a lot about how things are really likely to develop. Why did it happen? Well, because Ukraine won against the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And the surface ships of any kind now look just obsolete. They are far too vulnerable. And the Ukrainian very effective sea drones can take them out. So this is something that is really happening now. And the Russian surface ships that remain in the Black Sea have fled to Novorossiysk or to Abkhazia in eastern, at the eastern part of the Black Sea. And the Ukrainian ships, I think it's about 3,000 of them since September 2023, have shipped all the raw materials that Ukraine need to ship out since then. And it's both grain and steel and iron ore. Why this is so important is that Ukraine, by and large, exports commodities, 90% of commodities. The agricultural goods used to be 40% of Ukraine's exports. Now it's 60% of the export value. It's steel and iron ore that have become less important because of the Russian occupation of the steel works in the east, notably in Mariupol. So these commodities are not sufficiently valuable to be transported by truck or railroad. So they should be shipped over the sea, and now it's possible to do so. And militarily, the former Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Andrei Zagorodnyuk, argues that what Ukraine needs is what he calls strategic neutralization, that Russia will simply have to stay back because it can't risk its military assets being exposed to the Ukrainian arms. First comes the sea. Something should be done about the exports of oil generally. There are many alternatives to that. And then it should be done in the air. Polish Minister of Defense, Radek Sikorski, has suggested that Ukraine and Poland could together cover half of Ukraine in a no-fly zone. This would be in Poland's interest, and this is how Ukraine is now becoming helpful to the security of Europe. Another example is that the Danish government invited Ukrainian drone producers when Denmark had problem with Russian drones over Copenhagen airport, because Ukraine knows how to take down drones cheaply with drone interceptors. And these are clearly future Ukrainian big export goods, the sea drones and the drone interceptors. And this is the direction in which Ukraine should go. And I mentioned here, first, Ukraine needs financing. Second, it needs shipping over the Black Sea. The third thing is electricity. Electricity was a big problem part of last year and reduced Ukraine's production. Now it also looks as if the Russians are trying to have Ukrainians freeze in the winter by attacking the gas assets. So this is what also needs to be done. But frankly, Ukraine seems to be able to do this at an extraordinary cost, but Europe had better provide the financing. If Europe must guarantee so that Ukraine can win this war, and we should talk about Ukrainian victory and nothing else. So how should we move forward now? As you see, I've only talked about Ukraine, because if Ukraine fails, there is nothing else, much else to do about the Eastern Partnership. Moldova looks wonderful in terms of its political and reform activities, but it's entirely dependent on Ukraine for security. And it's, without going into details about Belarus, clearly what happens to Ukraine will be decisive for Belarus also. So it's Ukraine's success that we should focus on. What I have not talked about, and I don't think that it's really that important, it is the domestic reforms, because the reforms will happen. I saw when I was in Kiev now, 6 of new ministers. I was greatly impressed. They're young, average of 39 years of age, well experienced, all speak good English, all have good education, they know their jobs. I think that Ukraine has got to a situation now when it has a very capable government. It has varied. Dmitry Boyachuk and I have been discussing about it a few times before, but now, to my mind, it looks quite good. And the aim should be full reform, no particular exceptions for Ukraine, but EU accession by 2030. And then just a few words, what industries will take off? Of course, agriculture looks very good. It's now grain and oilseed production. Animal husbandry should develop. Obviously, Ukraine will become a major arms producer in Europe, and as long as President Putin remains in Russia, there will be big demand for arms, and Ukraine will be a supplier of arms. After a war, you need to rebuild. Infrastructure is a big change. And of course, Ukraine needs to have a new infrastructure connecting it with Europe. Whenever I cross the border between Russia and between Ukraine and Poland, I see many kilometers of truck lines on the Polish side of the border. I don't know who is hindering what, but this is not as it should be. And this will take time. It's an enormous, arduous work, and we really have to honor the Ukrainian people for all that they are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anders, for your excellent presentation. And let me now take just a few minutes to conclude this event. Quite long and I think busy. And I would like to thank first to all speakers, authors of papers presentation, for presenting interesting, very timely topics. I want to also thank moderators for controlling the discussion and keeping perfect schedule. And then entire audience, both all colleagues who are here in this room, but also all over 30 people who participated online in this conference. Basically, my first, I would say, reaction is that The degree of analysis and level of presentation and discussion much exceeded my expectation as the person who coordinates this project and took part in putting the agenda of this event. Basically, I must say that we have worked on very, I would say, tight schedule. It was less than 2 months from the time when we found sources to finance this event. And basically, it was not much time to organize call for papers in presentation, to put together all organizational issue. And from the point of view of project agenda, which I presented at the opening of this conference, it's all presentation and intervention were very complementary and very well fit to the thematic frameworks of this project. But because of this very short time for preparation, I think that big credit should be given to the entire organizational team of CASE. There were not so many people, coordinated by Marta Kowerko-Urbańczyk. Then is Aleksandra Kuchta, Katarina Kasik, who was also still is manager of this project. Then Alexandra Gryźlak-Śląstek and Emil Cypryniak. And organizational team was advised, assisted, and coordinated by members of the CASE management board, Jan Hagemejer, president of CASE, and Marek Peda, vice president of CASE. Jan Hagemejer also was active participant of the entire project. He supervised foreign trade, investment, and migration part of country reports and was author of the respective chapter on regional report. I would once again thank everybody. Wish a nice weekend. All these colleagues who came from outside Warsaw, especially those who are first time in Warsaw, I would recommend, despite rainy weather, to visit city, which is worse, especially this area, so-called King's Road and then Old City. So don't be afraid of rain and look around. And I hope that we'll stay in touch. And one more information, we will approach you and ask for your permission to upload your presentation to the CASE website. We also will consider possibility perhaps of publishing some video records, but this is more complicated story because we, I think, recorded some 7 hours or 6 hours, and we are not sure about technical quality of this record. So perhaps also we will publish part of the event as such, but again, will approach those who will be disseminated online to give their approvals. Thank you once again, and see you at next opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anders.
Thank you, Marek.
Okay.